Here we are. Well, here some people are. With only one more chance. It's the wild card open for Royale Masters, where we have 16 players battling out for the last 2 spots in our playoffs. I'm Rich Slayton. That's Andrew Guy, and this is Royale Masters, the Classic Edition, where we are having a massive season leading up to a big playoffs, Andrew.
That's right, and today's the last day, the last time you can get an opportunity to go and compete for that $10,000 in what Rich and I have deemed one of our absolute favorite tournaments ever. And there's a big reason for that. We'll break it down in the format in just a minute. But today, like he said, 2 guys move on. Everyone else, they get a little bit of money and better luck next year. So let's talk about the format here at Royale Masters. Overall format, well, where are we? We're a month into this competition. We've had 3 open qualifiers, and as Rich said today, it's our last chance qualifier. This is where we have the exact same format. Yesterday, it was a days-long competition. Today, 16 players have come through. It's a single elimination bracket played in our Royale Masters dual format. Here in the Wild Card Open, it's the same as the open qualifiers, except as you can see right there, only the 2 top players are going to go through, and there's a little bit less money on the line because we're giving up so much next weekend. All elimination matches are going to be best of 5 next weekend, but here today, it's a best of 3, single elimination, and of course, our first place match will be a little bit different. Rich, a lot of money, not as much as our normal qualifiers, though.
Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of chances to get into the big bucks, and now you have one more chance. This one, we do have some money on the line, $600 to first place, $400 to second. And those are the 2 most important spots because those are the spots that go on to our playoff weekend where the big $10,000 prize pool, $10,000 chunk of our overall prize pool will be. But still, just for making it this far, you do get some money for your troubles, and you add a bit more there for every step you take down that single elimination ladder. And Andrew, you know, you mentioned the format that we have here. It is Royale Masters. This is a little different version of duel mode, though, than we're used to. Because instead of it being, hey, whatever deck you play in game number 1 is out in game number 2, and so on and so on. Here in Royale Masters, there's a bit of a different twist. You only lose access to cards that you win with. So if in game number 1, you play this Royal Giant kind of bridge spam deck there on the bottom, well, let's go to the top where it says winner. If you play this bait-ish deck with a Firecracker and Archers, interesting choice there, by the way. If you win with that deck, you cannot play it for the rest of the best of 3, or when we get there, best of 5. But the player who loses can reuse those cards throughout the rest of the match. Again, you only lose access to cards you win with, which, Andrew, as you and I have said many times on this broadcast, does give us a little extra, a little more chance to go to best of 5s, which, of course, gives us an even better result.
I'm still laughing at the Royal Giant bridge spam deck. I love that I feel like we've never acknowledged how bad both of those decks are until right now, and I'm very glad you've finally done it. And people that are also very happy are probably the 16 people that have made it through today. And what's really interesting about the Wild Card Open LCQ is that a lot of these players are kind of what we saw in community tournaments maybe like 2 years ago, right? Where you see a couple names where you're like, I know these guys. These are some of the big hitters in the world. And then like the other half of the bracket is made of people that you don't really know. And that's what's so cool about the Wild Card Open is, you know, some of the biggest hitters we've seen here at Royale Masters, they already got their points, right? They already won their week. They already got their money, whatever it is. Here today, there are the people that are competing that are still trying to get in. So when you take a look here at the bracket, like I was just saying, there's names you see. I mean, we got big time world finalists here, but there's also a bunch of guys that you and I know nothing about. And we always have fun casting matches like that. Rich, big standouts here to you.
I mean, I think there's some pretty clear names here. On the left side of the bracket, you have Furin, you have Sandbox, And some smaller names there like Jors and Vempers are both guys who've been in the mix before. On the right-hand side of the bracket, we have our featured match of the day between Tico and Adriel. That's a banger, of course. Trainer Adnan out there. And, of course, this year's World Finalist, making his 4th World Finals in a row, might I add, Vitor 75. So we'll see if he can carry that same level of success through today to make the playoffs for Royale Masters.
Yeah, I mean, we don't usually do this in Royale Masters, but since it is the last chance qualifier, do you have anyone when you immediately see their name out of this 16 that you're like, okay, that guy, one of those guys should be in the top 2? I'll go first to give you a second since I put you on the spot. Sure. I love what he's done this year. I'm going to say, and I know there's a lot of big names out there, but I'm going to go Trainer Adnan. I know Adriel and Vitor should be like ins almost, but Adnan has done some really cool stuff, specifically here at Royale Masters, whether it was Summer Clash or King of the Hill. I would love to see him just show up today and then get in those finals next weekend.
Well, I think you said the exact reason why I'm not going to pick the same way as you, because both Adriel and Vitor are on that same side of the bracket, which makes that, in my opinion, the side of the death side of the bracket. Yeah. Whereas on the other side, the biggest names that stand out are Furin and Sandbox. And Sandbox has had a good but not great year, fallen short a few times. I feel like Sandbox is in for a good day today. As long as he can get past that second round, I think he makes it all the way to our finals.
Yeah, I mean, no, Sandbox is a player that you and I had the pleasure of hanging out with last year in Finland, and 2023, unfortunately, just wasn't really his year. And, you know, hopefully he'll be able to bounce back next year. That's the big thing about this game. And that's one of the things we talked about last time we were on broadcast, is kind of the ups and downs of being a competitor in any professional sport at any of the highest level. But that being said, it is also about coming back the following year, which is why someone like Goten, someone like Morton is so impressive. Maybe he's never won World Finals. Maybe he's gotten so close a couple times. But the fact that he gets there every single year, and it's almost, I mean, it would be always more surprising if he doesn't make Worlds than he does make Worlds. So we'll see if Sandbox can kind of put that same practice into his 2024. As of right now, we're just waiting on the players coming in. Apparently, we've got a note here from our admin saying Trainer Adnan missed playoffs by just 1 or 2 points. So I think, hopefully, if he has a good day today, being able to ride that momentum, he might be able to, you know, my premonition might come true.
Well, the format here for Royale Masters is deceptively hard, right? Because there are the 2 stages. First, you have the qualifier stage, where it's I think it's Swiss the whole way through. I can't remember if it's Swiss or an open tournament. But either way, only the top 4 from each qualifier make it through, which makes that's a really hard thing to get, right? Top 8 lets you have some more mistakes. Top 16, of course, even more. But top 4 is such a small, tight window. You have to get a hot hand that day to make it far enough to get it past that qualifier stage. And then, once you get through there, now you're in this round of 16, this bracket. This is a single elimination bracket. So, you know, you talk about difficulty of formats. There is so little room for error in the Royale Masters format. And that's part of why you see some bigger names that you would expect to be here not being here, just because of the challenging nature of the grueling journey to get to this stage.
Yeah, it's an all-day event that takes place right before the competition here today. And I love that you say hot hand, because that's exactly what it is. When you look at so many of the players that don't make it, they still have like 7-3 records against some of the best players in the world, right? A lot of times, I mean, for our open qualifiers, we're hearing from our admins, you know, Tasty Bacon up in the booth telling us like, oh yeah, he went 10-0 and they went 10-0. And that really is what it felt like. In order to obviously be guaranteed, you almost had to be perfect, but you throw even 1 or 2 losses in there and then it's totally up for grabs. And I think, again, yeah, that is what makes this really tough. And then even adding in the Royale Masters format, which you and I love, it's still not a format that people play with all the time. So there's still a little bit of that learning curve, especially when you get deeper in that best of 3. And as you and I have had the pleasure of seeing in our best of 5 final matches. So just to let you guys know, this is Royale Masters. Obviously, we love it. We've talked about it endlessly, but this is the end of it. So if you haven't already joined in the competition, you missed the boat this year, but still, you should go follow along with everything Royale Masters. They do tournaments every single year. Rich and I are always happy when we get the call early in the year to say, hey, we're doing it again. This year it's Summer Clash. we got King of the Hill, we got Royal Masters Traditional. So who knows what 2024 will bring. So go follow on Twitter, Discord, subscribe right here on the YouTube channel, or if you're watching on Twitch, give us a follow, because that's the best way to know what's going on. I mean, and the admins, like I said, Tasty Bacon does a really, really good job of communicating in that Discord, letting everyone know we're ready to go. I mean, I see it. I always have my Discord notifications turned on for like events that we work, you know, and it's like all day the day before. He's right on, you know, Group 4 round, or Group A round 4, whatever it is. I don't even know. I don't really read them. I just get the notifications. Sorry.
Yeah, they totally blow up my my feed as well. So well admined, and also I should probably just mute those alerts, because I don't even know when round 4 Group A starts. But you know what? You might need to. So as he said, go join the Discord, discord.gg/RoyaleMasters, and Royale Masters on all different social media. And of course, if you're watching here, I see some of you are watching here on YouTube, some of you watching on Twitch, hit a subscribe button, hit a like button, because of course, next weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, we have the playoffs for this event with a, you know, we talked about the stacked lineup there. That's the top players from each of our first 3 qualifiers, plus the 2 winners from today. And then in December, an even more exciting special event coming after our World Finals for Clash Royale League. So you can make sure that you don't miss any of that action, and subscribe and hitting that notification bell so that you know when we go live for those events and you don't miss a moment. People are always coming into the stream going like, well, what did I miss? Am I late? Well, here's how you don't be late. Notifications on, get here on time.
And you just mentioned CRL, so let's talk a little bit about our first matchup here today. It's Tico and Adriel. Adriel is a guy that was really, really impressive for a long time. Last year was the year it felt like he maybe would be becoming part of that S tier. Well, really, it's been 2023 where you look at what he's done, you look at the points that he scored in CRL, coming out in 11th behind, obviously, our golden ticket winners, but still not being at the back of the pack of those leaderboard point players. He's a scary force, and I think the biggest thing is what is he going to be like live on stage? Tico, on the other side of it, a name and a guy that you and I know pretty well, definitely doesn't have the same professional accomplishments that Adriel has. But when you look at where he's at on that CRL leaderboard, he's around people like, you know, Hajime and Remieli and people like that. So you know those names. You've heard them for a long time. And, you know, and here we are joining this match just a little bit late, but we are here nonetheless. It's Hog top of your screen, which we see a ton of, and then Ram Rider at the bottom, which honestly we've seen more and more of in this competition, almost exponentially as the weeks have gone on.
Hog, well, there's a few things that are interesting about this deck, right? Seeing Hog, Valk, Firecracker, just showing the evolution of what's happening right now in duel mode. And again, this is unrestricted Royale Masters style duels, so a lot more variability than you'll see in what we saw in CRL this year. Then another thing we don't see as much is we don't see a ton of Ram Rider played with a building. Of course, this is probably one of the 2 most common with Ram Rider alongside the Inferno Tower, but typically Ram Rider doesn't run a building, so Adriel will be happy to have that, at least as an option here against this Hog deck, even though he's likely to get outcycled pretty regularly.
Nice fireball there, but will lose that Mother Witch. And yeah, the Goblin Brawler getting a little bit of love after that buff. Going to get a Lumberjack connection on the right-hand side and a couple Piggies on the left. This Brawler, though, should still have some legs, so going to have to see a Firecracker come out as well. Nice response there from Adriel and from Tico on both sides. I think it was Surge TS who was always giving those fun comments out there, you know, pro tips. And one of the things he said recently, I think it was maybe just yesterday, is if you're struggling on defense, one of the things is your reaction time. And I do have to say, when you watch the pros play, even though it's in single speed, it seems a little bit slower than it actually is in real time to respond. Still, the amount of having to, the wherewithal you have to be able to react defensively as quickly as these guys do, it always impresses me.
You see Adriel taking advantage of some of the elixir lead he built due to that Arrows play on the Firecracker. And just one thing leads to another in Clash Royale all the time, but now Hog should have a nice opening to get a little bit of work done on the right-hand side. A couple of very important hits, no just one. Still, either way, that does get us back within a close range, and that Skeleton Dragon took a very long time to shoot on the left-hand side.
Yeah, the targeting issue there. Skeleton Dragons, cards with lower fire time. You know, we talk about that first hit of the Magic Archer going down a little bit. Firecrackers, Skeleton Dragons, there's just Zappies sometimes. There's a handful of cards out there with that slower attack speed that they just don't know what to target and where. And then the other part of this is you look at the fact that the Firecracker and the Valkyrie and the Bomb Tower is doing a really, really good job against these recruits. I mean, that's one of the biggest things I think about the Valkyrie kind of coming back into the meta is just how popular the recruits were. And, you know, Rich, right when that Bomb Tower buff happened, it felt like it disappeared for a couple weeks, but already it seems like the bomb tower has come, not even come back in the meta, but just kind of bowed out for a little bit and then decided that it wasn't going to leave.
It just has too much utility. It doesn't matter. I mean, you'd have
Yeah.
to nerf it truly into the ground to make it not viable. It is your splash damage building. That's a massive amount of value that just all the single target buildings can't replicate.
Yeah, and the best players in the world really, really utilize that death damage. So here we go, getting down to the last final seconds here. Tico 1286, Adriel behind by a lot, and Tico did a really good job of just getting these firecrackers out and causing problems with them.
That pig going to do a little bit of touching, but this is just not going to be enough, and Adriel going to try to slide his way through here. Won't have enough spell power to get past this one. And good deck selection here by Tico, and Adriel just kind of running into a tough spot in game number 1. Outcycled and no real way to get that Ram Rider consistently into the second level.
Yeah, being outcycled is a really great point that you make there, because there's so much utility on the bottom of the screen there with Adriel. You know, he's got the Mother Witch, he's got the Skeleton Dragons, the Lumberjack, the Ram Rider, all these things, they work great. They're great cards. And I was going to say, I even felt like he probably had the matchup there, but Tico played it really, really well. I think the matchup probably changes with the Valkyrie. I think that's the biggest thing. So that matchup, I think, is kind of doing a disservice here to Adriel. But that being said, there's Fireball and arrows, so you have a way to take care of the building. You have a way to take care of the Firecracker. But Rich, as you just pointed out, look at the cycle cards, right? The Ice Spirit, the Skellies, the Log, they're all played in double digits. The Firecracker played 13 times. So when you say outcycle, yeah, Adriel's deck has a lot of great cards, but if those recruits can't get up front and actually like create a wall because of that Valkyrie and that bomb tower, all that utility does not matter. And then you have those Firecrackers that is just pulling Elixir out. Every single time almost is that negative Elixir trade because the Fireball might want to be saved for something more substantial.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, you'd think that the Skeleton Dragons would be more of a factor in this matchup, and they did get involved a couple of times, but with only the Ice Spirit and the Firecracker as ways to really get on top of those, really it was about keeping them tanked up high with that Valkyrie, able to soak that up a little bit, and just distract them long enough to get them off the board. I'm very surprised that the Skeleton Dragons weren't more of a factor. But part of the same problem here is that, yes, you have these two big spells, right? You have the Fireball, you have the arrows, so you can take out the regular Firecracker and the Evolved Firecracker with those two respective spells. But it does mess with your cycle a bit when you're waiting to hold onto that Fireball for the Evo Firecracker, and when you can't use that to really help the Ram Rider break through against the Bomb Tower. And so those two things together, the use of Bomb Tower, Ice Spirit, Log to keep the Ram Rider off the tower, the Valk, as you said, to control a lot of those recruits, just very nicely done by Tico.
Yeah, and if you're Adriel, you know, to further your point, you have to save the Fireball for that Firecracker. The way that damage stacks up, what it does to your recruits with your Skeleton Dragons in tow, I mean, that's the other part of it, is you have one of the best ways to get on those Skeleton Dragons because they usually split, they usually get behind the recruits, they don't have a ton of HP, so that Firecracker ends up being so much more impactful than something that is just like single target DPS from far away, like a Musketeer, which, again, like because of how good Executioner and Firecracker are, we see very, very little Musketeer these days. I also like the deck that Tico built just in terms of, you know, what we're doing in Royale Masters dual format. Yes, you're taking out your Log, but you are using Earthquake, which only goes with Hog, and then Valkyrie, which is not used in a lot of other decks, is a great substitution for Knight. So now you still have Evoed recruits, you still have Evoed Knights, Evoed Knight, and you also still have Evoed Royal Giant, obviously. I mean, we didn't see any of that here, but the reason I mention that is just because Evo RG does feel like he's kind of crawling back up the rungs on that leaderboard. It feels like he's definitely going to be there at World Finals, whereas maybe a month ago we would have said, nah, I don't think we're going to see much RG at all at Worlds.
I'm curious about, and look, that's what I'm going to say, was does Tico go with something that the arrows would be good against, maybe hoping that Adriel doesn't run arrows in this game, and maybe Adriel's just running it back one more time? Nope. Looks like he might be going with the minor recruits and potentially the Executioner setup.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then this poison actually is going to be really, really great for Adriel throughout. You look at the ability to get on top of the Skeleton Dragons, the Spear Goblins behind. I mean, that's so much of a part of this is, you know, you get a little bit of that dual lane pressure going on, but also those Skelly Drags, you're always trying to get a lot of value out of them, just as you talked about maybe the missing value out of them in game number 1.
And wall breakers do not connect, going for a little quicker cycle. Adriel maybe felt like he didn't have as much outplay potential in the last game, giving himself that opportunity, and not going Xe most likely here now that we see the Archer Queen in the mix.
Yeah, Archer Queen, people have been trying, right? They've really been trying to get her back in the conversation. I think everyone is just really trying to figure out a way to get an evolution and a champion on board at the same time. It feels like Skeleton King and Archer Queen are the 2 best options at that right now, but still we haven't found great synergy yet, but I do like, at least when you look at Adriel's deck, how cheap everything is, because that AQ plus recruits is 12 elixir just on their own.
Sneaky little choice there by Adriel, going to the back early, of course recognizing NATO not going to be involved and getting back there. Very defensive, very control-oriented deck from Adriel with the Royal Delivery and the Bomb Tower. Archer Queen can definitely cross the line and go both ways, but Adriel here just believing he can outplay in the long game.
Yeah, and I think that Tesla right there is a great thing to drop, just because the AQ not going to be able to reach over the middle. And really curious what Tico's last card is, because the Archer Queen being cycled and kept on the board could be... Ooh, and just a little bit late on that delivery is Adriel. Both those Skeleton Dragons on top of the tower. And that is actually a huge, huge mistake.
And this is the interesting thing, right, is you see the Adriel trying to break the... Adriel had a lot on the board there. But you see the more defensive-oriented posture with the recruit, with the delivery, rather than, say, a log, for example, where you could have used that more offensively to get the queen through and get her on tower. Instead, didn't have a good support option. So Adriel really has to win the defensive game, really has to win the control game. He can't rely on making big offensive pushes. You can't rely on overwhelming and breaking through. And right now, that reliance is causing real problems for him.
Yeah, and I like that Tico's changing up his offense a little bit. Now you see that delivery comes out early, so the Skeleton Dragons immediately come down, which now changes the pace here because the AQ is on the left-hand side instead of the right. This miner has really been a problem for Adriel. He doesn't have a great way to catch that miner. The only way he has to catch it is with skeletons, because if he catches with the recruits, it's just going to get spelled off the board, as we see over and over again. That's an easy trigger pull on the poison for the recruits. They're going to split 4-2, and you're going to get a ton of value.
Now trying to get more poison value. Does not have his miner for the catch. Full miner poison push opposite direction, and this recruit goes back, which might even get some Skelly Dragon splash on there. And this is pretty much done here. Just cycles back to one more poison, and Tico gonna come out and 2-0 Adriel to kick things off.
Yeah, I mean, our world finalists just in and out just like that, and that's exactly a testament to your point that you talked about earlier with this Royale Masters. Not only is our qualifying day tough, obviously show day is even more difficult. These are the people that were able to get through that grueling Swiss gauntlet, and Tico makes light work of the world finalist in Adriel in both Game 1 and Game 2, Rich.
It was just a very, very nice performance, but also, you know, I think that Adriel really, I don't know what Adriel was trying to predict there in the matchup, but chose this really, really defensive version that didn't defend as well as he would have liked, and he wasn't able to hold off against the minor wall breakers pushes. He seemed like he had answers to the Skeleton Dragons, but what that also meant is that he kind of felt stretched thin a lot, and then didn't really get an opportunity to break through the other direction. And we saw one really good opportunity, but that opportunity was one where he didn't have the last piece he needed, a way to clear the path for the Archer Queen to really threaten. And as soon as Tico realized the Archer Queen wasn't going to be a legitimate threat to take down his towers, it was just an easy race to the win there for him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this deck from Adriel, and it's just really kind of an unfortunate matchup that you kind of found yourself in, because your opponent has the big spell for your Archer Queen, so you're not always cycling her behind tower to just keep her on the board, which is something that's always nice when your deck is like... This deck is kind of deceptively heavy. And the reason I say that is because everything cheap doesn't really provide much value other than their one thing, right? Miner goes straight to tower, delivery comes straight down. Otherwise, they don't get to pick up miners and like turn that into a counter push. They don't have any way to get on top of those skeleton dragons, you know, which is such a great point from game number 1, because I think we were able to see here in game number 2 how much of a nuisance they can be once your player recognizes that they can't be controlled. And if they are controlled, how do you really abuse that? So Tico recognized early on, okay, Adriel, he's been a little slow on the draw with that delivery, and plus that's his best way to get on top of these skeleton dragons. So let's just keep pressuring with them. And then it started to mess up his cycle. Then the Archer Queen had to come out on the left-hand side defensively. And again, it goes also back to the fact that there's no good way to get on top of the miner. So all these things kind of coming together, I think, again, is to your point of this deck just being a little too defensive. I think there's either you need to swap out the knight for the recruits and then get another card in there that can be kind of used in terms of just like straight DPS, even as something just like spear goblins or bats. But whatever it is, this deck, and also in the numbers there we saw from Royale API, not used a lot for a reason.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You brought up the Archer Queen early on, and people trying to figure out how to mix champions with evolved troops. And a lot of the problem, of course, has been that a lot of the champions are mini tanks, and a lot of the Evo troops kind of serve the same spot, fill the same slot in your deck. And the Archer Queen is the odd woman out, right? The Archer Queen's a ranged troop. But I think we saw in this matchup one of the key reasons why the Archer Queen has not gotten a mix in, and that's how popular one of the two most powerful of Evo troops are, and that's the Knight. And we actually saw one play on the left-hand side where the Evo Knight came down and started hitting the Archer Queen. So, of course, what does Adriel do? Pop her ability. But then the Evo Knight starts walking, activates that damage reduction shield, and the Archer Queen's ability is an absolutely wasted couple of elixir, and then that Evo Knight turns around and kills her. So it's one of those things where the Archer Queen synergy with Evos should be viable, but because of how prevalent specifically the Evo Knight is, she ends up being kind of a waste in those spots as well. So stuck between a rock and a hard place right now are all of our champions.
Yeah, I mean, really, you talk about how much elixir that is with the AQ just coming down on the board, then popping the ability, and the fact that, you know, the Knight is going to be played differently now. You can drop it right in front of your Princess Tower so that he's walking the whole way, as you're talking about. He takes very little damage. Now you've spent 6 on 3 that is still on the board. And not only is that 3 still on that board, it's not really 3 on the board. It's more like 6 on the board in terms of how strong that Evo Knight is elixir-wise, right? Because it's more than just a Knight. It's like a really, really strong mini tank. So I completely agree. I think it really is just the Skeleton King. It really feels like the Skeleton King is the only champion that's able to work, and that's just because of how popular the recruits are. That being said, there's really only a couple makeups of those decks. It's usually either with a mortar or with wall breakers, but it's like Skeleton King, recruits, and you get like a gang, you get skeleton dragons in there. It's very, very spammy. But if your opponent is able to kind of hold and lock on that defense, then I think players kind of hit the panic button before they get to that final minute, which is when those types of decks really, really shine. We'll see if we see any of those today. Just to catch you guys up a little bit on our bracket, I've got it pulled up here on my other monitor, and it looks like it's been a lot of 2-0s. Oh, but Tasty is faster than I am. So here we go. Furkan 2-0, Sandbox 2-0. So that's going to be a really, really fun quarterfinal matchup between Furkan and Sandbox. At the bottom of our screen, we are just waiting on whoever Venpers will play off against. Looks like Freeze and Underbridge, I'm not sure, are taking their time. And then you look on the other side, Abbas beats Trainer Adnan. So there we go. I gave him the caster curse. Tico 2-0s Adriel, and then Vitor goes 1-up on Satoru.
Well, Miguel and Turista, let's go ahead and jump into that one since they are still finishing that last first round matchup. And, oh, this is our, so never mind, not that one. This is our last active match here. Freeze and Unra.
Undrabarj. I gotta say, I got bodied by this deck at the top of the screen earlier, like yesterday. There was an Executioner at the bridge. Golden Knight got dropped last second. It dashed, hit my Knight, hit my Firecracker, got on top of my tower. Drill was behind, and I went from a completely healthy tower to a tower down and a phone thrown in about 20 seconds.
Well, you know, you talk about the pairing of an Evo with a champion, and here we see one. Golden Knight. We see it on both sides, right? We see Golden Knight paired with the Evolved Knight, and I think that if Golden Knight hadn't gone through such a horrific nerf to where it is probably the worst of the champions, we'd maybe seen Golden Knight paired with Evos a little bit more. I think very specifically that nerf probably is why we haven't seen that. And then the Mighty Miner with the Firecracker in this drill deck, and you can definitely see some value between those two, and Firecracker does seem like she might be one of the key evolutions that could be paired with our current set of champions.
Really nice double NATO there, offensively and defensively, to give Freeze the advantage. And yeah, you know, these really are the other two champion kind of makeups that we've seen that actually work. I mean, people have tried to do the Valkyrie Archer Queen with Mortar thing, and it just doesn't, I don't know why it doesn't work. I really want it to, but it just doesn't. Whereas these two are two more that and there you go. I mean, that's a really, really great NATO. And while Freeze had a really good offensive NATO, I was almost more impressed by Unra's defensive NATO, and then you see right there on offense, the perfect placement for that to get the Golden Knight on tower.
And on the right-hand side, ticking away after a nice bit of work here. Final 2 minutes, sudden death overtime, and able to get a little bit back here is Freeze. Interesting to see how different these two looks are between these two drill decks.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you know, I was just to go one further on what we were talking about decks with champions and evos working. This deck at the bottom of the screen, now it's not obviously the Hog Rider deck, but when the last global tournament that there was, obviously there's no evolutions in there, and people started to use Mighty Miner, Firecracker, Hog Rider again. And wow, that Mighty Miner tanking for all those goblins, that is brutal. Luckily for, we should just call him Unra, I think, now. I can't do that every single time, even though I want to, but it looks like Unra. Drab? Yeah, Drab. I like Drab. There it is, right there in the middle. Drab, their only saving grace here is no big spell at the bottom of your screen, but now a log and a NATO, you can cycle that a couple times and take this game.
192, now getting around 1,000 HP. The combination of the Inferno Tower and the Mighty Miner have done a good job primarily of shutting down these Executioners, not to mention the Evolved Knight, but these Firecrackers could be a problem. Has to block up high, does get it off, but no, only gets one of the two, and game number one goes to Freeze, who really has not done a lot competitively. Did play in the summer season of GKR back in 2022, but this could be the biggest moment of either of these two players' careers.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I actually really like the gameplay from both of them. We saw some good plays there, and honestly, since NATO is such an S tier card still, you know, when you talk to pros about what the best cards in the game are, NATO's still absolutely one of the best in the game. I saw some really great NATO work from both of them. That being said, that's game number one, right? Did they just both go to their comfort deck? Are they just ladder players that play one thing, or is there a little bit more in their bag of tricks? Really liked what I saw out of those guys, though, and you can see right here. Pretty different looks, as you were saying, about those drill decks, and that was what I was saying about the deck on the left hand side of the screen. The Mighty Miner Firecracker with a win condition, whether it be Hog Rider or Drill here, was something that started showing up more and more in that global tournament. Obviously, no evolution, so you lean back on champions. And I think it reminded people that, oh yeah, Mighty Miner Firecracker with EQ and Hog, or Mighty Miner Firecracker Drill, this is a real thing. It's just, again, when you throw evolutions back in the conversation, it doesn't seem to be as impactful. And then on the other hand, I don't know, man. I do love every single time I see a Golden Knight connection with a NATO, as long as it's not on my tower. Sure. I just don't know if it's actually as viable as players like Drab wants it to be.
I don't know about that for either of these two decks, right? Because you look at Freeze's deck, I don't totally understand the NATO. Like, there's a lot of things that don't make a ton of sense, right? The synergy for the NATO is just one extra defensive card, and it works with the Firecracker. And then the other piece of that, right, is that you have the Mighty Miner and the Inferno Tower both kind of doing similar jobs. They're both hardcore tank killers, right? So there's a lot of stuff that kind of fits the same mold. So now if I'm Drab, I'm looking at this deck choice and I'm going, wow, you just took out two of the best tank killers. Is this where I get heavy and maybe go somewhere in the beatdown direction? Because you just took out some of the biggest concerns for me if I'm thinking about trying to go with something that's, 7 elixir or more. Is this your chance? Is this a Goblin Giant opening right now, which is so popular
I mean,
and so strong at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say right now in the meta, it feels like almost everything is a Goblin Giant opening, but losing both of those, that's a really, really great point. I would probably maybe lean on Goblin Giant or Golem right now because Golem,
Sure.
that NATO Golem, well, I guess you don't have NATO, right? So you actually can't play that Golem deck.
Trab does because we're in Royale Masters. Right,
but
still.
Oh, is that who you're saying should go to? Is that
that's what I'm
saying
because,
should go heavy?
because
okay,
with,
gotcha.
with Freeze winning and losing, and now can no longer use the Mighty Miner, and also can no longer use the Inferno Tower.
Yeah.
Right, so Golem or going with Golem or Goblin Giant both feel pretty strong right now.
Yeah, I love that call. I go Golem, and the reason I go Golem is just because Recruits is still really popular. Goblin Giant, Sparky, or Goblin Giant Beatdown, they fare just a little bit worse in my opinion, whereas Recruits against that Golem deck, they don't do too great because there's usually a splash card, there's the NATO, and there's always that E-Dragon. So really curious to see, and Drab going to go with a Mortar to start things off, a very rare play that we see these days, unfortunately for me.
Yeah, well, especially Mortar first play is not super duper common. It's one of those plays where you see some players do it on ladder, and it's probably because they know who they're matched up against, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone knows what everyone's running pretty much in every season, unless you're running into one of the snipers out there. So interesting to see the Mortar first play, and doesn't end up being too bad though for Drab in these opening moments.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I think we are going to see Goblin Giant and Sparky at the bottom of your screen, and at the top of your screen, we're going to see what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is that Skeleton King with, there we go, perfect, Mortar, and all these spammy cards like Gang, like Spear is most likely going to have Recruits there as well. So, decks we've talked about, and kind of what we thought we might see, but on the other side of the screen, we thought we might see Drab. Go ahead.
Those Goblin Giant spears on the back are so much more impactful than they used to be, and it's, again, we talked about this in a recent broadcast. 3 separate buffs to impact the Goblin Giant over the last few months have made it very quietly suddenly become a central part of not just ranked or ladder play, but also competitive play.
Yeah, and those spears are just so difficult to deal with in single elixir because the ideal way to deal with them is to get your tank down first, or you're building down first, and then you can play a cheap card. But if you're looking at Drab's deck there, you don't want to just get the Skeleton King out, and if it's pretty hard to get the elixir for those recruits. So that's why you see a little bit of a struggle there defensively, but still in the lead is Drab at the top of your screen.
And great sequence there by Freeze. Because last time he played the Sparky in the back, it was immediately Goblin Gate at the bridge. He probably didn't have the arrows in cycle that time. This time he's ready for it, easily counters the miner, wipes everything off with the arrows, and now has a really nasty counter push going the opposite direction. Just the big question is, can he get past these recruits? So far the answer has been no.
Yeah, and I think he did a really, oh wow, and that actually, the shot from the Sparky pushing it back just a hair saves it with a sliver of HP. And I love the idea that Freeze had there is, you know what, I need to figure out a way to get 2 tanks in front of my Sparky. So not only am I going to get a Goblin Giant there, I'm also going to get my Evoed Knight because you know the recruits are going to come down on top of the Sparky. It's just too obvious of a play.
And this just looks like it's going to be the same song sung over and over again. No real way to get through this. That's a nice shot there, and now that we're in double and triple, that's really the only hope for Freeze.
Yeah, for Freeze, you see him kind of trying everything, and that's just like stacking up on the left-hand side and then getting minions over the middle to deal with the recruits. This Mother Witch needs to get involved in the conversation a little bit more, but Freeze just isn't able to figure out how, and you see him leaking a couple elixir just now after the Mother Witch gets fireballed, because he's just trying to figure out, what do I do with this final 90 seconds to break on through, because what I've been doing has not been working.
And you're just
seeing... I think he just needs to focus on dual lane pressure a little bit more, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, that's what worked for him before. The only real significant damage he's gotten was when the mini-Peck was able to go to the right-hand side. So now is a good opportunity for him, though. He has a half-health Spark. He has a Knight in front of it. Can he put anything to the left-hand side? But the problem is he's so low on Elixir that he can't really capitalize on this moment.
Yeah, and you see right, and again, leaking just an elixir or two, not sure what to do, no way to get on top of this Mortar. And that Mortar being cycled early on before Goblin Giant even comes down means he just can get all the way back around to another one. And this spam has just been brutal. Nice use of the Rage there, but he's not going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I think the only saving option here is going to be if he can really make a big stack on defense, and this might pull back a little bit farther than he wanted. He has to use a Sparky to tank for a Sparky, which is an absolute problem. And you see Freeze now waving the white flag after those Skelly Dragons get on the right-hand side. GG, well played. We're going to game number 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just outplayed in that situation. I mean, that's a really tough spot to be in when you talk about all those bait cards, because there's just no way to get them off the board. There's nothing you can do about those skeleton dragons. You have to, like, you know, hope that your arrows and your rage can be there and that that's actually impactful. And then the fact that Drab just recognizes, okay, cool. So now I'm just going to get my mortar down. I'm going to cycle cards in the back. I'm going to use my spam cards to defend, and there's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing you can do. The only thing that I cannot do if I'm Drab is not have the fireball when you play that Mother Witch. And other than the very first time the Mother Witch was played, you can see 4. Every time the fireball was right on top of it, 3 for 3 otherwise. And that's a fun matchup. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think why that deck that we saw Drab play has become so popular, is because it does really, really well against Goblin Giant Sparky, because usually that deck just has those 2 spells that we just saw.
And I saw a question in our YouTube chat from Adam Villalobos asking what were the buffs to the Goblin Giant. There were 2 direct ones and 1 indirect, or 2 direct, 1 indirect. The attack time for the Spear Goblins in the backpack was reduced 0.2 seconds back in July, or back in February. And then in in April, the range of Spear Goblins overall was increased half a tile. And then in August, the Goblin Giant's HP was upped by 6%. So reduction in attack speed, or a faster attack speed, farther range for the Spear Goblins in the backpack, and then on top of that, more hit points for the Goblin Giant himself. So 3 big buffs that all really impacted the Goblin Giant, who has now gone from an afterthought to the center of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, truly the center of the conversation. Even as you're saying that, someone's saying Goblin Giant needs a nerf ASAP, and
yep.
I agree. I think, honestly, they maybe just need to revert a little bit of health back. I don't know if they go all the way back, but just maybe just a little bit health off, because I think the issue with Goblin Giant is that it really, like, you spend so much more than it feels like you have to spend to defend it than like a regular giant, or even like a golem, or even a lava hound sometimes, because of exactly what you're talking about in those spears. It's not just like, oh, let me get my unit down to defend against the Goblin Giant as you would in any of those other cards. The problem is you need something to protect your DPS unit, or else those spear goblins are going to eat it alive, and then you've just thrown elixir away. And because that Goblin Giant has so much health, it is now on top of your tower. So yeah, Goblin Giants in single, double, triple, they're just really, really difficult to deal with right now, because it has so much HP. Then you're dealing with it on the front end, and then they get to pile all that stuff up on the back end. Or you see those every now and then. It's just like, all right, mini P.E.K.K.A Rage opposite lane, or mini P.E.K.K.A plus Dark Prince opposite lane with Rage, and you have no elixirs. So we'll see what happens with the Goblin Giant. Still waiting to see what happens in round number 1 between, oh no, there we go, I'm just waiting on the refresh. So we finally have our round done. All of our matchups are coming through, and we have I don't know, I would say, other than maybe our second round, or our second matchup of this next round, pretty much heavy hitters against no names, and then we have Furkan and Sandbox, right? So we have 2 of the biggest names, and then we have kind of 2 unknowns, and then otherwise it's Tico and Turista, and then Abbas and Vitor, right? So then there seems to be some levels there. We'll see if that's actually true. I mean, round number 1 was not the way that our world finalists wanted to go.
Sure, I would not. I'm double checking to make sure, because I think the El Turista is Tourist, who I would not overlook in this context. Yeah, I believe that's Tourist. So yeah, I mean, a little bit of a swerve there on the name, but I would not overlook Tourist in this at all. Does have a number 1 finish on ranked, so a few top 10 finishes on ladder overall. Made it to almost the top 50 in the CRL points this year. Tourist can bang, so that'll be an interesting matchup to see coming up there. But now as we go into this matchup, I was going to say that I didn't mind the idea of Freeze going back to the same well one more time, given that the Fireball and the Recruits were both out. Looks like he's going somewhere entirely different, whereas Drab might be going Golem here in this matchup.
Yeah, really does look like Golem, and
oh man,
this could be really interesting. I mean, you're going to be able to create a lot of pressure with these piggies, which is one of the things you want most when you're playing up against a Golem player. But with that King Tower activation early on, and this, wow, this flying machine, this is insane.
Forever. The Electro Dragon didn't get it off up high. The Mother Witch killed it just in time, and that you have to engage that flying machine when it's. I mean, I guess he didn't really have a choice because it was already attacking up high. But engaging the flying machine that high up outside of the Princess Tower range is generally a recipe for disaster, and we saw how hard disaster struck here.
Yeah, and this is Drab's doing exactly what he needs to do now, which is kind of reset, get that pump down on the board, work down his weaker of the two lanes here. But because he's going up against this deck that does such a good job in dual lane pressure, his opponent can sell out on the left-hand side when he needs to pull Elixir away, and that's exactly what we're seeing, right? There we go. Boom, 9 Elixir on the board as soon as I say that, and now there's no way to support this Golem. And I think, honestly, Drab is doing the thing that you want to do the least as a Golem player, which is not really pick and choose what you need to do. Now there's only a Lumberjack to support this Golem on the right-hand side. You're both ticking into double Elixir, and that's just not going to be enough to deal with this push. You need to sacrifice that left-hand tower, I think, in this situation, and just get on offense as the Golem player.
And a good kite overall that's not going to result in too much chain damage from that Electro Dragon. And the Zappy retargets it as well, so just everything going the way of Freeze so far, who goes for a 2-2 split since he has support in both lanes.
Yeah, and now there's just no way to get another pump down. There's no way to get another good Golem in, because if you ever Golem up again, you're going to see exactly what we saw before, but you're not in a situation where you can sacrifice that tower now, and that is what you needed to do earlier. You cannot build that Golem push without sacrificing either tower damage or Elixir, and Drab just didn't do that. Now he's in a spot where he cannot get a Golem down, and he can only get pumps down, and every time that they come down, it's an easy fireball because both these towers are so low.
And he would love to get a goal in front of this. He just can't. Got a tick to 8 just as it all crosses. And so he golems up into that weak side. And this is, look, I liked the idea of a golem call. I liked it a lot better in game number 2, here in game number 3. I wonder if this would have fared better had he not sacrificed as much damage early on and then been fighting from behind on Elixir. Either way, so far so good for Freeze.
Yeah, I mean, he just needed to sacrifice damage, period, and he just couldn't find a place to do it. And I get it, it's scary, but it's just that arrows to nothing. That arrows to nothing.
Evo Knight down.
Arrows nothing.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do?
I'm just so confused. I thought it was the white flag arrows again, but then it's like, no, those arrows are on the bottom of the screen. But okay, here we go.
This is holding. This is holding.
And he just needs to sell out. Yeah.
Well, this pressure is continuing to stay on the board. The goblin cage finally comes down. This Mother Witch staying alive this long is a huge problem for Drab. I mean, he had a small chance of fighting back in here, but that Mother Witch staying on this long is going to make that fairly easily get into spell range here. Might not even need spells. That might be it. GG, well played, and Freeze goes ahead and takes the round 1 matchup to move on in our bracket. He'll be facing Venpers in round number 2.
I got tricked by the play because it's like you see the arrows come out on nothing and you're like, okay, that's the white flag, but you're like, wait, the wrong guy is waving the white flag. This makes 0 sense, and I'm pretty sure he just meant to split his zappies right behind the Goblin Brawler, which makes a lot of sense. You get the Golem pulled towards the middle, you get all the units pulled towards the middle towards one of your beefy cards, you get the zappies behind to slow it all down. But I mean, that is exactly why, kids at home, you never give up in a game of Clash Royale, because you never know when your opponent is just going to waste 3 Elixir, waste their small spell. And yeah, Drab almost gets given a gift from the Clash Royale gods. Freeze able to hold on for dear life.
Well, that's not the first misclick I think we saw out of Freeze, because in that Goblin Giant Sparky matchup, someone pointed out that there was a oops, and that was not, that was just a bad, either a misclick or some sort of drag. I don't think drag glitch is a thing anymore, is it? Still a misclick with the Sparky to drop right on another Sparky. So a couple of little misplays there, but not enough to derail Freeze, as he will add to his prize pool haul and keep in the running for those top 2 for our playoffs.
Yeah, let's take a look here at our bracket so that all of you at home know exactly where we stand here at our wild card open in Royale Masters, from 16 down to 8. Just like that. Tico and Turista on the right-hand side, as Rich pointed out. That is tourist. That is not... They just love to do this to us. Abbas, Vitor, Freeze, Venpers, and of course, Sandbox, and Furkan. And just like that, out of the frying pan into the fire. Rich, I think that Freeze was maybe feeling the pressure a little bit of a competition.
Yeah, I mean, that's you can't discount that at all. And I'm going to be very curious, especially, we've talked about the performance nerf people do experience sometime. I'll be curious to see, of course, how that comes into play at World Finals. But even if all you're doing is playing for money for the first time or playing on a big live stream that's hosted inside of the Clash Royale app for the first time, that really changes how you feel about those moments for a lot of players.
It really does. I don't care what anyone says. And I don't know if you saw what I wrote in the chat about the heart rate stuff. I feel like that's a conversation you and I have had in the past about seeing heart rate monitors for players, because
that would be so cool.
You know that adrenaline is just jacked through the roof, even in situations like this. And a situation like this not going well for Sandbox so far, as arguably one of the best or the best Royal Giant player in the world in Furkan takes a big swing early on.
I mean, can we suggest that to the CRL production?
I did.
That's
because it would be awesome.
It'd be so cool.
Because, wouldn't it? I feel like I don't know why I thought maybe you and maybe it was just a fever dream we had years ago talking about it. But yeah, man, I want to see a heart rate bracelet on the players at Worlds. People are going to walk up to the stand before they've even started playing with like 140 beats per minute, just jacked already. And then in the gameplay, it's going to get up to like high cardio.
Oh yeah, they come up there and their heartbeat sounds like we're at a rave. I'm in.
And you're like, dude, you haven't even started yet. So right now, that Mother Witch able to get some good value, a nice swing back from Sandbox with this Ram Rider deck. And yeah, this is going to be interesting because the Ram Rider can help kind of slow that Royal Giant, but that is not the only way you want to have to keep a Royal Giant at bay.
And Furkan playing what I believe, and I need to just double check and confirm what I'm saying before I speak out of turn here. But I believe that this was one of the two, and yes, this is one of the two most successful decks from Furkan out of any decks that were played in CRL this year by those World Finals. This deck had a 65% win rate, over 20 wins in our bracket play during monthly finals. The only deck that was played more, but was played to a lower win rate, was the Remy Eli deck with 30 plays for a 57% win rate. So this has been one of the most reliable decks on the year. The big question is, will it maintain that reliability when we go to Worlds?
And that was a really great push put together by Furkan on that last send, because it made Sandbox have to fireball the Evo'd RG, I think the Skeleton King, and the Zappies. And the Mother Witch was just far enough behind. So it was basically Furkan's getting a push coming across the bridge. He sees that Fireball is in cycle. He does a sellout push at the bridge to bait out the Fireball so that the Mother Witch can still get value. And that is, again, why he's such a great player with this deck, is he just knows the ins and outs and all the ways you need to use the cards to abuse it. But on the other side of it, Skeleton King plus the ability plus the Fish Boy, and now so much Elixir comes out on the right. Another RG on the left, and this is just... I mean, even though Sandbox is making a game of this, it does feel like Furkan has been really in control.
But this Mother Witch could be a huge problem for Furkan right now. Ram Rider doesn't connect, and it does touch. He has to go to the Mother Witch. Doesn't matter.
That's
GG.
it.
Well played. Game number 1 for Sandbox. And I have to make a correction, Andrew. I was just looking at the Season 7 stats for our September CRL season. When I go and look at the entire CRL 2023, this was the most successful deck of the entire year. Whether it with the Evo, the Evo version had 65 plays in 2023 at a 70% win rate, and the non-Evo version had 93 plays at a 74% clip. So this was the number 1 and number 3 deck in CRL this season, whether you factor in the entire 2023, whether you factor in the Evo RG or the Classic RG.
And just, if you could, at home, go back and watch the final moments of that game, because Sandbox does such a great job. Rich, you called it on broadcast. You're like, that Mother Witch is going to be trouble. She comes out, gets on top of the Skellies, gets on top of the Tombstone, right? Okay, that's not the end of the world. Not a lot of pigs, but still a little bit. And then Sandbox sends in that Ram Rider and Heal Spirit. The Heal Spirit was so beautifully tucked away. It hits the Ram Rider, gives it all the health. The Ram Rider kills the second Tombstone. And even during all of that, Furkan fireballs the Mother Witch that is just crossing the bridge. Tower's dying. He's got a pig. I mean, excuse me. He's got a Ram Rider and like 3 piggies on there, and he's still worried about the Mother Witch. That is how impactful that card still is in this game. No matter what level you're at, you have to deal with her. And just like that, Sandbox saw a beautiful opening, takes one of the most abusive cards in the game, and steals it from Furin, who I think almost maybe got caught up a little bit too much in the dual lane conversation. Not sure if that's really what happened, but it does feel like at the end there was almost like, you know what, I might just take your right-hand tower. Sandbox did a good job of taking a lot of damage, and only think spending like 4 or so elixir to defend that.
Yeah, I mean, a great job of staying in that one, and really the Tombstone was maybe the big Achilles heel here, right? Yeah, you saw Furin setting up a decent defense, but Sandbox had that Tombstone perfectly timed, that Mother Witch perfectly timed, and the counter push just came in and really blew right through him. So now we go into game number 2, and let's talk about the math, though, because, again, Sandbox no longer has access to the Inferno Dragon, the Lumberjack, the Mother Witch, the Recruits, Barb Barrelhoy, the big pieces there. Obviously, a Ram Rider and the Heal Spirit. But, you know, talking about what this takes off the board here, Mother Witch means probably no pigs, right? Recruits being gone really opens up a lot of options for Furin and makes the Fisherman even stronger. I wouldn't be 100% surprised to see Furin go back to the well here. Instead, maybe going to be going to a Goblin Giant deck.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually with you on that. I was thinking it might be a really good idea just to go back to what you just played, because then you have just that, you don't have to worry about what lost you the last game, and that Skeleton King becomes so much more powerful in that matchup. So, you know, still the opportunity to go back to it in game number 3 if we get there. And Sandbox doing, I think, exactly what you're supposed to, which is I'm playing against one of the best RG players in the world. Goblin Giant is in the center of the meta. I need an Inferno Tower, and here we are.
And here we are, and easily makes the right choice, but Goblin Giant is pretty strong at the moment, especially supported by the Zap in that context. And interesting to just see the Rage uses a Cycle card in that place. Get a little extra damage on the Knight and the Princess Tower, and cycle him right back to a Mini P.E.K.K.A. to pick up that Miner.
And you're seeing right now why that Rage got dropped down. I mean, look at this push. It becomes incredibly dangerous just all of a sudden. Just like that, the Rage is cycled, and we got a Goblin Giant Mini P.E.K.K.A. push coming down. 2 Goblin Giants have already been played before we're even getting down to just a minute left in regulation. And this push really easy to kind of control by Furin.
And just getting miners involved very quickly. And I'm not sure what Sandbox is, if Sandbox is thinking that maybe Furin is running triple spell here, which is why he hasn't varied the miner placement yet. And again, he's getting, Furin's getting to 10 and not having troop plays that make any sense for him. So happy to just continue cycling, not the Zap, but keep cycling that Rage for a little chip damage and just to get the right cards in his hand.
And I really like that, and that's exactly the point that you make right there, is to get the right cards in his hand. He's getting a cycle exactly where he wants it, and also the Zap is where you're going to need it is over here, right? Just to add to your point, that Zap needs to be used for this Goblin Giant when it's getting on top of the Inferno. So there you go, perfectly timed on both sides. Sandbox knows the Zap's going to come in, pulls that back, but look at how much HP this Goblin Giant has, and then with that Rage, it's just like he is going to get on tower. 1940 now to 2533, and you have a deck in Sandboxes that has so much control, but he is having a really difficult time controlling these pushes and actually getting minor damage in.
Yeah, it's been very difficult for him the whole way through. This miner is trying to chip this very, very beefy Goblin Giant down early. He will defend it, but you know, he's being forced to kind of throw elixir at a lot of these Sparky pushes here. And the missed defensive NATO, that might be a huge nail in the coffin for Sandbox here in game 2.
Yeah, it's just it's more than almost anything. It's just like a blow to your confidence. You're out of sorts, you're out of cycle, you're trying to get a King Tower activation to help with that Goblin Giant because he has so much HP. You mess up the NATO, and it's just perfect for Furin because now he gets to just he gets to stay in this winning cycle for another full couple, I'd say full 2 cycles because of that NATO coming out.
Well, and Furin has so many ways to catch miners that pretty much all turn into counter pushes, right? I mean, you have 2 troops that he decided to use for this pressure on the left-hand side rather than to save and catch miners, because he frankly doesn't need to catch miners right now. But when it comes down to brass tacks, he'll be able to easily catch miners with those 2, turn them into counter pushes, and doesn't even have to right now because the miners have to play defense. Kaboom.
Wow.
GG.
Yeah, exactly. The miner has had to play defense, Rich. That is exactly what I was going to say, is it's just been the only time that miner was able to get damage in was basically in single elixir in the beginning of double. Otherwise, he had to keep coming out to either help support DPS on that Goblin Giant, or as you saw there at the end, just eat Sparky shots. And that matchup is absolutely devastating. There's no way to win that. It feels like your opponent has to not know how to play Goblin Giant Sparky because of all the things that we just talked about. There's no way to pick up that miner. There is not a lot of great single target DPS. Once we get into double and triple elixir, there's no way to make that Inferno Tower actually be impactful, because you just go arrows early, rage on top, and then zap as it's starting to power up, and then you've got a Goblin Giant with 80% HP running towards your towers. So great deck choice there by Furin to take us to game number 3.
Yeah, so you take a look at the first 2 games between these 2 players. Sandbox, still no Fireball for him, no Mother Witch, no Inferno Tower, and you see the no recruits, and you saw how Furin took advantage of there being no recruits, getting rid of one of the big shields plus distraction options in that matchup. But now Furin, missing arrows, zap not really a problem. Evo Knight, and then of course not being worried about Goblin Giant Sparky anymore. I mean, really, I like this deck choice for Furin for 2 reasons. One is it took advantage of some of the openings that his opponent gave him, but number 2, it really makes it hard. I think that Sandbox has the harder game planning here in game 3 than Furin does, right? Furin sees Fireball out, sees recruits out, sees Inferno Dragon out. He has a lot of information to work with, whereas on the other side of it, Evo Knight and arrows are the only 2 real big concerns. All Sandbox has is, I'm not really worried. I know that I'm not playing Goblin Giant Sparky. That's all he really has to work with here. Otherwise, the meta is wide open for Furin to choose.
I really want to see Sandbox just go back to what we, I mean, there's not even any point in saying this anymore, but I feel like Furin is going to now go back to Royal Giant, and I would have loved Sandbox to go exactly back to the deck he just played, except you take out one of those cards, whether it is the Inferno or the Log, and I wanted to see the graveyard version, basically, of that Knight Executioner deck with Ice Spirit. There's so much control there. You still have so many ways to deal with that Royal Giant. You don't actually need the Inferno every single time because of the Ice Spirit, because of the Log, because of the NATO. And I don't know, it would have been nice to maybe see that, but instead Sandbox goes to Hog Rider, which is kind of in the same vein, at least in the idea of you want to be able to really control the Royal Giant, Log, NATO, Ice Spirit, Bomb Tower, but then you also want to be able to create a lot of opposite lane pressure. The only thing is, the only reason I didn't want to go Hog Rider is because there's usually a Fish Boy in Royal Giant decks. So then if you go to Graveyard instead, it just becomes a little bit more difficult to control. Whereas when you're playing against Hog, you can sacrifice a hit and just defend with a Fisherman to build a devastating blow.
And I was wondering if it was going to be Executioner or the somewhat seen lately, maybe due to Muhammad Light, Wizard in that last spot. It is the Executioner. Interesting to see this being run with Earthquake rather than Lightning. This combination, this Hog NATO Exy deck has been mostly running Lightning as of late.
And that was kind of a rough sequence there for Sandbox. I think he's going to come out relatively unscathed, but he goes Executioner, Ice Spirit, and then Knight. And the Fisherman focuses on the Ice Spirit. Ice Spirit leaps and then pulls the Exy away, and the Knight ends up being enough to defend. But as you can see, Sandbox is a little behind on Elixir here, and Furin can feel that. That's a lot of Elixir that doesn't do anything other than defend.
Yeah, and I feel like we've seen those kind of plays from Sandbox more this year, right? If you talk about the challenges Sandbox has faced, where he's been in cycle or if it's been a deck choice situation, but I feel like we've seen a lot of plays where Sandbox makes stop the bleeding defensive choices that sacrifice lots of Elixir.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of panic plays. It's more spells, less troops. It's more panic, less min-maxing, if you will. And that's a nice NATO. I don't know how many times that's going to work, but it worked this time very, very well.
And RG with the Lightning. And the Lightning, even if the Lightning just does a stun and still takes a shot, even if the Lightning just stuns that Evo Knight, it still creates some value here. This is a good push, a good opportunity for Sandbox with the Evo Knight in front, and the Hog does get a very important shot here. So 1068, 1064, only 4 HP separating these two. This is a pretty solid moment.
Yeah, the pause on dropping that bomb tower was kind of everything there. You're talking about that Knight getting hit, but the bomb tower, if that was also hit, that would have been game over. Sandbox knew it was going to come down, knew that Lightning was going to come down, so he opted to drop that bomb tower just a second later. So Furin maybe getting a little bit too comfortable, but I think he's starting to feel the pressure every time these Hogs do connect. So Fishboy's out of cycle, and I mean, Rich, this is giving away the game. There's no reason to cycle that Fisherman up there. There's no reason to get rid of your best Hog defense.
747, 576. Sandbox needs to get this defense done. The high bomb tower working on the Fisherman, which means the RG is still being handled. NATO pulls back. That's a good Fisherman here. Just has to stop this RG from getting a shot. I think that he can, and he does. 430 to 460. The EQ in, the Fisherman will pull the Hog, and the Dark Prince trying to stop a good log here.
Oh my
Can
goodness.
that make enough room? Can the Knight get there? 182, back to another Hog.
EQ NATO, there we go. There's the EQ, and boom, Sandbox come from behind victory. Furin, I mean, unless I'm crazy, he gave that game away.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't want to go back and watch that one again after we're done here today, because that was a overall pretty fascinating situation. I mean, look, the Fisherman being played a little early. Here's the problem: is he knew he had to get damage on tower. He knew he had, and he wasn't going to win a Lightning cycle versus Earthquake cycle matchup. But, you know, maybe it was just that the Evo Knight made it so the Lightning wasn't as effective. You did mention the Fisherman being played kind of early and in a weird spot. But either way, Sandbox with a phenomenal come-from-behind win to get this best of 3.
I mean, you're playing in the same lane over and over and over against Hog Rider. Your Hog Rider player doesn't have to switch lanes. You decide to switch lanes as the RG player. Okay, that's not the end of the world. That's actually fine. Now you have great counter pushes coming across that bridge. All you need to do is set the line high with your RG, your Dark Prince, whatever, up high, and then use the Fisherman down low. But then the Fisherman started getting careless. The other thing that was careless was those Lightnings. The moment that Sandbox late plays that bomb tower and you Lightning just the Knight and the Princess Tower, if you're Furin, you think, all right, maybe I need to take pause a little bit here. Then we saw that happen again, where it was just a Lightning on top of the Princess Tower and the Knight cycling for damage. That's just too much elixir to give away. And that Evo Knight with the walk, that Lightning is not doing enough damage. So now you have this Hog Rider completely protected. And I'm a little surprised at how Furin let that game slip through his fingers at the end, because he took such a dominant lead early on. I think he just got caught in cruise control.
Certainly capable of happening. And now we go on to our second quarterfinal match. Freeze coming off of a shaky but successful start, as he'll take on Veners, who certainly has a little bit more experience playing in some of the smaller leagues like National Series, National League, Supremacy League, and of course some decent experience in the Snapdragon Pro Series.
Yeah, Freeze just going to Goblin Giant beatdown, it looks like, and Veners on the other side of that. Gonna be medium happy, I'd say. I think the bomb tower plus the recruits, the Ice Spirit, and the log, they're going to help quite a bit. But I do worry as we get into double elixir, just because of what we saw out of Freeze, out of Freeze in that first set. If he ends up getting a little frustrated, if he's not getting the interactions he wants, he starts going for desperation plays. We'll find out.
And a little clean off NATO does pull all of those into range of the Princess Tower. And going to continue with the pressure, and those charging recruits get some good value out of that. So good damage, good elixir advantage, and Veners out to a nice lead early on.
Yeah, I mean, Freeze just cycles that Goblin Giant in the back. He knows what his opponent is playing. I don't know if there's really a reason to spend as much as he just did offensively this early on. I mean, this deck, obviously, when you look at it, it's going to succeed more once you get in double elixir. Everything is pretty heavy. There's not even 1-2 elixir card in the entire deck. So if that's the case, you're going up against a deck that starts by showing you Ice Spirit, Miner, and Bomb Tower. You know it's a lot of control. So there's no reason to spend that much in single. If you're the Goblin Giant deck. So we'll see if now that he's got more elixir flowing, if those big swings end up with a little bit more reward.
Veners has 8 games played in the last week with this deck, an 87.5% clip on those wins. So I think that's 7 of 8 that he picked up there, and showing why so far.
Oh, wow. Mini P.E.K.K.A snuck through, but then I think got caught targeting, doesn't actually get on tower, and that was a big save there for Veners. That could have been a huge amount of damage just based off of not being on top of your cycle. Recruits came down just in time.
Mother Witch giving lots of poison value, 13-10, the mark on the left-hand side, and now Freeze going to play into his weak side tower, knowing he can't really go to the opposite lane. And this is kind of the weakness in just playing this kind of Goblin Giant beatdown. You don't have as much dual lane options as you would have in other decks.
Yeah, and especially when you're running up against something like Xe NATO, that damage is done from so far away, and it's able to get so much splash damage in. And also, it just makes those defenses really easy, right? You can log early on, then you can NATO. Bomb Tower stays on the board even with a little bit of health, and it just makes it so that you have to spend a lot less than your opponent to defend than they do to try to create any sort of offense, and then you just send in a miner and see what happens.
And now finally trying to switch lanes here. Keep the Mother Witch away from giving all that value on the left-hand side. Final minute, triple elixir, and it will take a miracle right now for Freeze to be able to come back, and right now it looks like miracles are not in the cards.
Yeah, he doesn't know how to defend, he doesn't know how to create offense, he's taking damage where he can to try to create some space, but it's just not a lot. These recruits are completely dominating the board. That Bomb Tower plus Xe plus Ice Spirit plus NATO is making it so that Goblin Giant just cannot create any sort of presence, and there you go, Freeze waving the white flag once again. Fireball on top of tower.
Well, you know, you look at the last week of these two players, right? The deck that Veners has had a pretty deep deck pool this last week. Clearly, if you look at what Veners is doing from the decks he's played this last week, he's playing from a competitive standpoint, right? In the last 80 games that he's played, 10 plays of Drill, Bowler, NATO, another 8 plays of Ram Rider, 8 plays with this deck, a few more with some minor wall breakers, some Lava Loon. Then you go look at what Freeze has been playing. In the last 7 days, 226 games, 85 of them Hog Cycle, 39 of them minor wall breakers. In fact, it's way more of Hog Cycle, minor wall breakers, just by variation. Almost all of them have been various cycle decks. I don't see a single play of this deck that we're talking about right now in the last week of this Goblin Giant deck that he's playing right now. So this kind of feels like a guy who's used to playing a variety of things in Veners, who's been playing competitive, going to a deeper deck pool, versus a guy who really only plays some Hog, plays some minor wall breakers, and then plays some Mortar, right? He plays a few cycle decks and is trying to do something different, trying to be unpredictable, trying to play like a competitive player, but playing a deck that he has little to no experience with, and we're seeing the results there.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what you have to do, right? I mean, you really do have to try to become unpredictable, but the problem is when you're unpredictable, you don't know how to play these matchups. And even though what we saw there was only 7 of 8 with a sample size of 49, still, it is one of those things that I don't think it was as heavily weighted in Veners' favor as it felt like it was in that game. I mean, I think, again, the dual lane pressure, the fact that your opponent has poison and not fireball means that Mother Witch can be just a little bit more annoying than she actually was. That dual lane pressure really needed to happen where you had a Goblin Giant going down one lane with some support, and then you had a Mother Witch creating problems on the other lane, and then you throw a Mini P.E.K.K.A or a Dark Prince down in front of that. Yes, the recruits are trouble. Yes, that Bomb Tower is trouble. The Executioner is maybe the X factor because there's just really no way to get on top of that Xe. So I don't know. It feels like I wouldn't want to play that matchup, but also it looked like he did not know how to play that matchup.
And I see Jiren in our YouTube chat asking, are these guys pros? Some are semi-pros, and some are talented casuals, right? So most of these players have at least a little bit of competitive experience in some way, shape, or form. Venpers has far more experience than Freeze playing competitive Clash Royale, and we're seeing the results of that one. And then obviously some of the players who are in this competition still in our bracket at the moment. Players like Sandbox, who's been to World Finals. Players like Vitor, who's going to World Finals. Right, we saw Adriel in here earlier. There are definitely some players who have a lot of experience, who are pro players. So a big mix, which is speaking to the fact that we are in an open competition. This one did have open qualifiers, and on top of that, how difficult that qualifier phase was, that we have a mixture of world finalists, semi-pros, and talented players who don't have much competitive experience at all.
So Hog in both directions, and two very different versions of Hog, and a big sellout push here by Venpers, but Freeze might have everything he needs in this Mighty Miner. Now some Goblins going to come down late, maybe after the Ice Spirit.
He might be trying to hope he doesn't take that Prince shot, and he does take a tap from the Prince, just a little bit of hits. And you know, I asked some of the coaches about this deck, Andrew, because this looks a lot like that Miner Mega Knight Prince deck that was so popular for a while. And their answer was pretty simple, that you play this version with Hog Rider when you think the rest of the deck has a good matchup, and you either don't have Miner or you want to save Miner for later. And that's it.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And so going with Hog here in a deck that, you know, looks a little funky, but still got a tower-seeking win condition behind all those big beatdown cards with the Firecracker in tow, of course.
And this is interesting. I'm curious about the deck selection from Venpers here, because after Freeze went very uncomfortable in the first game, it seemed like going to Hog or Miner, and maybe this would have fared much better against Miner, but Hog being his comfort, it seems like Hog was a pretty likely choice in game number 2. Maybe he felt like this would match up better against some Hog decks, but in the situation he's in, he's finding himself in a lot of trouble. Although, take a look at that. The Inferno Tower out, arrows to clear. Can this Hog get 2 shots? And it does. Wow, so here we go. Single tower game as we get ready for sudden death overtime.
And that changes the conversation quite a bit, because you look at how heavy this one deck is at the top of your screen. And, I mean, Venpers needs to get a little bit more innovative in his defenses, because he's just doing exactly what you would expect him to do, and it's giving too much value. But that being said, this deck, since it is so much heavier, should be better in a single tower game. I mean, there's going to be opportunities where if Freeze ever does have to go to King Tower to try to create any pressure there, that Venpers can kind of just do a sellout push on this right-hand side. So we will see how this goes over the next minute 48 as Freeze maybe not in the best position after taking that first tower.
Yeah, he still has the Inferno Tower, but now the Inferno Tower, you see where he has to play it, it doesn't have the same viability that it had in 2 towers, because before you can play it more into the middle, you can protect it a little bit more easily. Now that you're trying to play that Inferno Tower in the middle, a troop can get on it, EQ can get on it, Firecracker can splash through it. Kind of a dangerous situation. But the other big question here is, can Venpers consistently defend against Hog Riders?
Yeah, and the fact that this Inferno has been so difficult to deal with, and then turn that around, the other thing that Venpers really needs is to be able to have a Prince and a Mega Knight defending against this Mighty Miner. So now Mighty Miner's out of cycle early on. This could actually be really, really good. Now he can get that MK down up high, Prince behind, and then maybe sneak something in the pocket to get on top of that Inferno. And there you go, Ice Spirit looking for whatever that was.
Yeah, Ice Spirit does come back and, wow, does come back and get the Firecracker a long way around. And for the moment, Freeze does have the lead here in game number 2 by a hair.
Yeah, and that was a frustrating last interaction there, honestly. That was what felt like the spot, if you were Venpers, that you were going to be able to take a lead. But Freeze doing a great job with that early cycled Ice Spirit and then just utilizing his Firecracker plus Inferno. Now a lot on the board. Mighty Miner is there, but Mighty Miner's not going to stay alive.
He might want to try to kite these to the other side of the map. No, Prince sneaks on through. GG. Well played. And Venpers faced some adversity, but the overwhelm of that Mega Knight Prince combo finally gets it done, and he moves on to our next round.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he needed to do that whole time. It was just about getting that Mighty Miner off the MK with the Prince behind the MK. That's all you needed. The Mighty Miner and the Inferno is too much to deal with, but just one of them at a time, there was a way around it. The other thing I noticed is once we got into that single tower game, it felt like the Royal Ghost was actually part of the conversation, whereas in that initial first couple minutes where it was just going for the first tower, it felt like the Royal Ghost didn't really know where to be played effectively. It felt like as the game went on, Veners was more comfortable using him. Even in the final moments, we saw MK in the pocket, Royal Ghost in the pocket, and that was a reason why that Prince was able to get on through to the tower. And when it comes to a charged up Prince, it just takes just one of those lance stabs.
Yeah. And we saw a couple Princes sneak through, right? We saw a tap earlier on, right at the beginning of the game, where maybe a bit of a miscalculation with the Ice Spirit and just not quite reading that Prince length the way maybe he would have hoped for. So, what you're kind of seeing here is a little bit of a difference in, as we said, the experienced competitive player and a guy who's mostly focused on playing ranked and ladder, hasn't had to deal with that deeper deck pool quite as much. Rough choice in game number 1, maybe playing some matchups he wasn't as familiar with, goes to more of a comfort deck in game number 2 and loses a very close one here, but still takes home a nice little chunk. I don't know if we have the prize pool available, but we do. I think that you made at least $50 for the first round, and I see some people asking about the prize pool in the chat. This overall multi-week event has a $30,000 prize pool. This is the Wild Card Open. You might know this better as a last chance qualifier. $2,000 of that $30,000 on the line today. So just for qualifying, made $50, making the 5th through 8th place. And this is what we just saw for free, $75 now. Everyone who wins gone from here to the end gets at least $100 up to $600. And of course, the top 2 from today will go on to our playoffs next weekend, where $10,000 will be on the line for those finalists. So that will be a whole lot of fun for us to watch as well.
Yeah, that 2-day event is going to be a blast, and we're only halfway through our day here today, but we're going to take a very, very short break. Do not move a muscle. A lot more to come, and the finalists still up for grabs. We'll be right back here at Royale Masters.
And welcome back from our short little break. Hope you guys got yourselves some popcorn because we've got some stuff to watch here as we are trying to find our last two finalists for the playoffs in our $30,000 Royale Masters event. And Andrew, we've gotten through a nice little chunk of our bracket. We do have two of our quarterfinalists in Sandbox and Veners. All they have to do is win one more match to be into our final and, of course, to be into our playoffs next weekend. But we also still have four players who have to win two more. Tico and Turista and Abbas and Vitor all trying to vie for those last couple of spots.
Yeah, I mean, that's really nice for Sandbox and Veners. Like you said, you're just one set away from being qualified for that $10,000 tournament. And then Tico and Turista were so excited they couldn't even wait. They're already into their game, so we're going to join them in just a second. We do have it recorded, so we're not going to be missing too much of the action there. But obviously, guys, come on, follow the rules. We're on break. And then, of course, like you said, Vitor and Abbas, that's going to be a really interesting one just because, Vitor should be hoping to be in the best form that he has been in all year. He's just a month away from where he needs to be the best he's ever been in his whole career. So we're going to see if that is ramping up here today. He already dropped one game early on. A lot of these guys, we've seen a lot of 2-0s throughout the day. We'll see how Vitor is in just a minute. But first, we're going to be going to Tico and El Turista, which, as you said, Rich, has had a really, really nice ranked finish. It was at the end of last year, so it's been almost a year anniversary since the last time they finished #1, but they also have a global tournament finish at the beginning of last year. So, 2022 really felt like was maybe a stronger year for this competitor, but, year almost over, still showed up a few times in CRL, 16th, 32nd, so kind of a quiet year in terms of the highest level of competition out there, but no slouch in his competition in Tico, who we saw play very well against our world finest, Adriel, to kick off the day.
Yeah, Tico had a good first round, good deck selection, and Tico's one of those guys who it's hot and cold streaks, right? That's the thing about Tico is he's able to play very, very well. He even made one of our monthly finals brackets, the second of our 7 seasons, or a second of our 7 monthlies during this last 2023 season. Didn't have the greatest run in that bracket, of course, but getting all the way through that ladder, like top 1,000 ladder, Swiss bracket, making it to the first in your round robin stage. Turista had almost a very similar story where he made it to second place in our first monthly final in our first month in his group for round robin. So came very, very close. He made the group stage twice, just didn't quite have that breakthrough moment. So we'll see if he has that breakthrough moment next year. Of course, would love to break through right now and add a bit more to his bag for this year.
And we are watching this in a very interesting speed, but we'll see if we can get that fixed for you guys. Turista, 52nd on the year, winning $1,250 in terms of US dollars, $1,250. And then Tico right behind him in 58th place with 245 points, so just 5 points behind, with $1,000 in the bag. And, well, we at least know what the decks are. And we are seeing this deck that we just saw played at the bottom of the screen from Tico. We'll see if he can be as successful as the other competitor. And looks like they're just going to come back to us.
Yeah, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump into game 2 here. The players did start their game early when we were on our break. We were trying to see if we could give you a little look at what they actually did during that first game. But unfortunately, we weren't quite prepared for the players to be playing when they weren't supposed to. So here we go into game number 2. It was Turista who got the win in game number 1. Running Monk, Ram Rider, Firecracker.
Yeah, and that Monk plus the Ram Rider plus the Inferno, I think, really was super helpful in terms of dealing with that Firecracker plus MK plus Prince push, right? You just pop that ability, and that push just sits, and the Firecracker takes itself out, and then you can drop an Inferno up high. There's no way to reset that Inferno, so a great deck choice in game number 1 by Turista to put him up 1 game as he just sits and opts to defend. And again, Rich, we saw this matchup earlier. This is a pretty good matchup for Turista. As long as he knows how to play it, this should be pretty easy to just keep that Sparky controlled. And opts to go Miner to take that shot, let the Mortar finish things off.
This is the exact kind of deck that favors Tico's gameplay style, right? Tico tends to play kind of that, doesn't play beatdown, he plays all of like that mid-size deck, right? He still plays, even in this modern age of the game, plays giant double Prince Miner, right? So kind of plays a lot of these mid-thickness decks, if you will. The question is, can he find the opening here against all the things to block his roots when he's trying to get that Sparky to weave on through to that tower? And so far, it's not looking good for him.
Yeah, a lot of damage comes in on that right-hand side. No counter push really here to talk about. Fishboy should pull everything in, then a really nice Goblin Giant. This is one of those defenses you love to see. No spell used, no rage cycle, no getting a Mega Minion out and taking a bunch of damage, just getting right back on offense with a really, really great card to help clean up spam in that Goblin Giant. I think you pause here and just try to defend if you are Tico, and that's exactly what he does.
And Rage definitely useful on that gang, but needs to get more going if he wants to get the win here. 881 to 661.
And Sparky locks on the spears instead of the Skeleton King. Kind of shoots not what you want if you're Tico. And this push is just not dying here from Tourist.
And he might get this ability out from the Skeleton King. Opts not to push it and try to make it happen. Tourist, so far, so good. 881, still the mark on his right-hand tower, but has gotten that left-hand side down to 1269. And he's just trying to play the pressure game, right? He wants to continue forcing Tico to play in this lane, not get in rhythm, and so far, it's working wonders for him. And that mortar connects on tower as well, and forces out another spell defensively from Tico.
Exactly. Now Tico can just go back, or excuse me, Tourist can go back and do the exact same thing. As the Skellies get on top of tower with the Miner, the Mega Minion attack speed too slow. But all Tourist is doing is going, all right, let me spam. Okay, now one spell is out, let me spam again. Now the other spell is out, and you just take the knowledge that you know from the spell that was played. If he's going to play Rage, then you stack the Goblin Gang. If he's going to play Fireball, then you stack the Skeleton Dragon. It's just an if this, then this situation for Tico, or I mean for Tourist, and it's really, honestly, a fun game to play if you're in his shoes.
And this Sparky just not getting any of what Tico wants out of it. You can see it's hitting everything but anything helpful. And that Miner
not have the elixir to get the Goblin Giant in front. Miner takes the tower. Yeah, just really, really well played, but also a tough matchup. You know, that is one of the toughest decks to beat if you're playing Goblin Giant Sparky.
Yep, Tourist just gets it done and gets it done fairly easily, putting himself into the top 4 and now 1 win away from our playoffs, our $10,000 playoffs next weekend. And I'll have to wait to see if he goes up against Abbas or Vitor in that next round.
Yeah, very curious to see how that shakes down. And bit of a matchup conversation here. It's only 6 of 8 matching cards, but those other 2 cards I think probably weigh this just a little bit more in favor of Tourist. I mean, there's just not enough spell power in the game to deal with all the spam that is on the board there, and yeah, making it really easy. I mean, we saw it was kind of a back and forth game for a little bit, and then all of a sudden Tourist saw the blood in the water and just goes absolutely nuts on that left-hand lane for the rest of the game. Tico just on his back foot, so congrats to both of them, but Tourist moves on, as you say, and now Vitor and Abbas just waiting to see who they will be facing off against finals, and obviously which one of them will make it all the way to finals. Abbas, don't know a lot about him. Was in CRL, got 66th on the season, had 220 points, didn't really win any money. He showed up in our qualifiers, but didn't really go ever too far, right? The best that we're seeing out of him in CRL in 2023 is 49th place. In 2022, we saw him in 22nd in one month. That was about it.
Well, Abbas, a log bait player by trade, if you're going to assign him to a deck. Obviously, log bait not super strong right now in competitive play. Does have enough skill to go a little bit deeper. Played in the summer season for GKR this year, along as a part of Cold Bear Esports. So does have a little bit of depth to that pool, but definitely if you're looking for what's he going to go to when he needs something, when he needs that comfort level, bait is the move. And could that open up in this version of dual mode in Game 2 or Game 3? Potentially. So if we do see Vitor, my guess is we don't see Vitor play a lot of bait counters in Game number 1. We see him try to win some other way in Game number 1 and try to bait out a bait deck in Game 2 or Game 3.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Vitor, I think I go with maybe even something like Hog EQ. it's something that you can, because if you look at the other decks that that is played by a boss, and you see, you know, a little bit of drill in there, you see a little bit of Royal Giant. So I think Hoggy Q would be really nice. You're able to create opposite lane pressure. It's a good control deck. It's obviously a deck that Vitor is very well versed with, as are all pros. And then in case you do run into bait, you still have a pretty good matchup, right? You can use the Teslas up high to get on top of those princesses. You still have Log to deal with the barrels, and you usually have a knight in there that can deal with tanking whatever is coming across the bridge. So I'd like to see that maybe, but you know, who knows? A boss, when you look at the games that he's played recently, obviously bait is in there. Obviously, that's, like you said, his favorite thing. Usually if someone plays bait, they're also pretty good with wall breaker spam. So that's also in there. Two other things that are a bit of a change is we see a knight drill deck with executioner. So that could come out. It'd be nice to see that. Otherwise, Royal Giant. Royal Giant recruits actually with Phoenix, which is a deck that is coming back. You know, I don't know if it's as good as the Skeleton King version. Well, that's still out there to be told. It is obviously very heavy. It takes 8 elixir to get all the way back around in that RG recruits deck, but that is the other deck that we've seen a boss play when you go and you look at their battle history. So those are the 3 that we see. We'll see what Vitor has. And then also at the very bottom, or mixed in, is that Elixir Golem, Skeleton King, Royal Recruits deck, which with Night Witch, which is, yeah, you're shaking your head. That is the new version of the Stinky Cheese deck. It's rough. It's spammy as heck. But I don't know if we'll see that.
I hope not, because Elixir Golem is evil. You know, no offense to anyone who plays Elixir Golem out there, but all the offense intended. You know, you talk about what a boss has done today. I see someone in our YouTube chat, or our Twitch chat, asking how Trainer Adnan did. Well, he lost to a boss who beat him with minor wall breakers recruits in the first game, and then with that Executioner NATO drill deck that you mentioned in their game number 2. So a boss came out nice in that one, and now has a bit more of a tall task, though, against Vitor. And again, you know, you talk about how these players might play on ranked or ladder versus how they play in competitive, and they're just completely 2 different games. So we'll see if the little bit of competitive experience a boss has been building up can help him against someone who's as experienced as this year's number 7 seed at World Finals.
Yeah, and a boss going to that recruits, wall breakers, bats, spears deck. And Vitor has Mother Witch, so going to be kind of happy about that. Not a lot of elixir to deal with on the other side. One of those wall breakers might connect. No, Goblin Gang down, doing work on the recruit plus.
And Miner getting tanked for briefly by a Skeleton Dragon. We'll get a little bit of chip there for Vitor early on. So Miner both directions, very different looks. A boss, this is the same deck that he ran in game number 2. In game number 1 against Adnan, where Trainer Adnan ran a 6 lumber loon. And
then when
just
you look at
this was
that
enough.
matchup, Rich, I think that this is a great call by Vitor. I mean, he works Mother Witch and Goblin Gang into this. He's got Skeleton King, so he has all these ways to stack souls. He has all these great targets for that Mother Witch to get piggies on the board. And he also has recruits to deal with his opponent's recruits. And that Skeleton King will be stacking souls the entire time. Not a bad spot for our world finalist.
Poison going to get some good value on the right-hand side, but might still give up some damage unless those recruits... No, they're able to hold off nicely. But of course, that's the point of this deck, the dual lane pressure. You spend a lot on one side, and those recruits go coast to coast and still connect, and that's one of the many reasons you see evolved recruits being such a central part of the meta right now. They really, in a way that recruits didn't previously, they are able to create offensive pressure, and that is just fascinating.
It's a pretty nice bomb tower there by a boss, and also a really nice miner to pick up that Mother Witch. Fireball comes down, a little bit of tricky or fast footwork from both directions, but I think that was maybe a moment for Vitor to go, okay, this guy's not playing around. He is definitely playing some good defense, and that was a nice offensive send. Maybe woke Vitor up just a little bit.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how he responds to that as time goes on, right? If he continues to play these more... I mean, look, the reality is that a boss is recognizing that Vitor doesn't have a building here. So he has to face these wall breakers every single time. That miner play is going to be there consistently. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Vitor responds. Maybe even tries to predict that sequence at some point with a fireball, which would be a really cheeky move out of the veteran.
Vitor right now, just trying to get some map control and get back around to another Mother Witch. You can see here, Abbas just keeps going for that miner to protect whatever comes down up high. Now the Mother Witch comes down late, and Abbas has to recognize that Vitor is not the type of person that's going to make that same play 3 times in a row. Maybe he does it twice, maybe you catch him once, but he's not going to do it over and over and over. And now Vitor takes a ton of damage in this right-hand lane, almost a tower's worth of damage there.
Yeah, that was a great recognition by the veteran that he had an opportunity to really put it in. And look, you see that attempt at predicting there, didn't have the wall breakers in play as well. And so easy cleanup from the Skeleton King. 80 seconds left, recruits in the back. I don't know, yeah, just the high bomb tower. That means it's not available for the recruits defense.
Yeah, I really like that from Vitor, just putting that Skeleton King on skates, really pulling more elixir defensively out of his opponent. And you know, we always talk about there's levels to this thing, and right now Vitor just showing how good he really is. 1183 to 592. Abbas still really in this, but Vitor making it very difficult to hang on.
Yeah, that was a really nice little sequence there from Abbas, and he's doing a good job, and forcing that fireball out is absolutely huge. He's doing a good job of making good pressure on that right-hand side, continuing to mix the miner in offensively, and even just getting one spear on tower is so huge. And now he switches to poison on offense. Is there an opportunity here for Vitor to take advantage of that poison being played offensively? He goes miner fireball. GG, well played. Game number 1 to Vitor.
Yeah, the second that you go aggressively and you poison that tower, not getting the poison on top of the Mother Witch, then the Mother Witch becomes so much more detrimental for you defensively, right? Vitor gets that Mother Witch down. Every single one of those troops is all spammy. And the bats, the wall breakers take a couple hits. The spears are just one. But bats and spears are going to give you so many piggies. It's going to stop that push right there in the lane. You don't even need to drop other units down because the pigs are going to tank for the Mother Witch and so on and so forth. So Vitor just goes, all right, now I have my opportunity to get back on offense, go for the tower, and get that miner into the usually the end of the game spot on the inside. Really good job with the fireball. Vitor fireballed, I think, only one time on the other side of the board, maybe not even once, but the other 2 were used defensively on those wall breakers, having the same recognition that you did, Rich, which is I need to figure out a way to get on top of these wall breakers if there's any sort of tank in front. So while Abbas didn't get a lot out of that miner placement, it did still bait elixir out of Vitor, and it never made that defense easy. So I applaud Abbas for that.
Sure, and you know, we talk about game number 2 now, right? And this was kind of the game plan I thought for Vitor. Don't really play your counter bait deck in game number 1. Play your counter bait deck in game number 2. And while this deck wouldn't have fared horrifically against bait, didn't play log, right? So he won and he still has log available, which has to be giving Abbas lots of fits in how he wants to game plan for game 2 and beyond, because he knows that Vitor can play log in both game 2 and game 3, because if he loses game 2, well, he lost and he still has log for game 3. So this is a great job of Vitor to pigeonhole Abbas into either play your comfort or don't, but know that log's probably going to be there.
Yeah, and if I'm Vitor, I would love to see like maybe a version of Splash Yard, maybe even the one with Executioner, just because bait is going to really fare not well against that. If you have a NATO, if you have a poison, you have a log, it's going to be so difficult to get those goblins on tower, and then setting the line high with an Evo Knight, no problem there. So I agree. I think Vitor did a really great job in game number 1, and this is, again, why we talk about levels to this thing. Abbas doesn't want to be predicted in game number 1, but he goes back to what he played in the original game number 1 here today, and that Vitor just goes, all right, what did you play? I'm sure you don't want to play bait in game number 1. Let's see what you did against Adnan. He's really good. That's what you did? I'm going to come out with this weird Mother Witch Skeleton King Skeleton Dragon deck that can just completely control the board, and now when you want to play bait the most, I should be able to play something that has like a 70-30 matchup. We'll see if that's the case.
I like Hog Inferno Tower as an option here for Vitor, right? You play with log to cover the bait options. Your opponent doesn't play a ton of NATO, although he might play one of those minor variations with NATO. But then you have the Inferno Tower to cover Royal Giant, which he's leaned on a lot. Interesting Snowball.
Yeah.
Which, Snowball arrows, maybe going Lumberloon here is a boss.
Vitor comes out with bats, so does go to Hog.
And there is a Lumberloon variation. Yeah, Archers, Fishboy. This is probably 6 loon out of a boss, which bats and Firecracker will be helpful, especially the bats, but Snowball and arrows both cover nicely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I love this from Vitor, but we shall see. I mean, there's not really anything to get on top of that balloon. I figured late bats, and there they are. Does get some nice damage from the MK and the Royal Ghost.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard for a boss to cover the dual lane pressure here, right? So they both of these, this is going to probably be an absolute slugfest between these two, as a boss really has Snowball to reset and the Fisherman to pull against the Hog Rider. And Hog Rider tries to go middle and see if he can make the Fisherman not pull well, and he does. Gets a shot in. Other side of it, not a lot of great counters for the Loon out of Vitor, especially when you take into account the Snowball and those arrows. I would have liked to see Vitor run something similar to this, but run it with the Inferno Tower to try to cover again. Try to cover the Royal Giant, try to cover... They would have covered nicely here against the Loon. Either way, this will be a fascinating matchup to watch, as he's probably to give up this tower here.
Yeah, I mean, I still would have just loved to see Graveyard. I mean, really the only thing you had to worry about would be the archers, and you can just poison those off the board, the NATO to bull, the balloon, all the things, but here we go. Vitor gets a Hog shot in, or a Hog Rider in, I should say. Snowball stops the shot. Firecracker does get some good value, though.
And great Prince.
Yeah, Prince on the right, Firecracker on the left. Dual lane pressure still coming in strong here for our world finalists. And then you see the oops, and that should basically do it. Royal Ghost on the tower, now 10 HP remaining, 514 on the right-hand side.
But a boss can full sell here. He knows he's going to lose that left-hand tower, but he might... They lose that right-hand tower. God, he's not quite going to do enough damage here on this left-hand side. And a boss just a little bit funky in the way he played this one. This is a deck that he came in with having only a 40% win rate, only five plays in the last week. So definitely not one of his main decks, and kind of just slipped up there a little bit, and the dual lane pressure not able to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he did exactly what he didn't want to have to do, which was try to stay unpredictable in game number 2. Was a boss there, and you can see in the gameplay the way that he was dealing with the dual lane pressure. The full sends to take a tower early on is great, but you know, that's only going to work mentally against maybe a more inexperienced player. Vitor saw, I think, that every single time he was doing that, every time we saw a boss really sell out on pushes, Vitor was able to get a lot of damage in both lanes. And you see the matchup there is technically in favor of a boss, but I do think that this is really not, you know, the win-con matchup conversation doesn't really come through. There's not a lot of samples, and obviously these are two very different levels of player. But I think the biggest thing was just that a boss did a good job of, you know, looking like a big threat, but Vitor was not scared away and just really kept up that opposite lane pressure.
It's really hard for a boss to control it's hard for both players to control where the other player wins, right? It's hard for Vitor to control the skies here, hard for a boss to control the ground here. And he just let he was able to, hey, I can Fisherman against your Hog Rider. But then when it comes to controlling both the Royal Ghost, the Mega Knight, and the Prince, all three of those on the ground, he just couldn't do all three at the same time, and ended up losing both towers. And you saw the oops there, got a little bit loose on that left-hand side. Either way, a very nice victory for Vitor, who joins our final four, who are all one win away from making next weekend's $10,000 playoffs.
And we are 4 wins away from ending our day. Let's take a look here at our bracket as we have our finalists in Sandbox and Veners on the left-hand side, Turista and Vitor making it through on the right. And, I mean, a lot of names here that you would expect in Turista, Vitor, and Sandbox. Veners, as we said, a little bit more experience than the other players he ran into, going 4-0 on the day so far, untouched. You love to see it. And of all of our finalists, he's the only one that has not found a loss yet here on our last chance qualifier. So 4 players remain, a third place match, and of course the final 2 will be moving on to our next weekend's event. And of course, if you guys don't know what that is, we have our Royal Masters traditional format championship Saturday and Sunday. Next week, all elimination matches, best of 5 in that Royale Masters dual mode. So not only is it going to be a little bit longer of a day, but you're going to see a lot of really, really interesting gameplay, especially in those first couple games. You and I love to see what players come out. We see a lot more snowballs, a lot more zaps in those games 1 and 2 than you do in these best of 3 sets. So that will be a lot of fun. Make sure you guys are following along with all things Royale Masters. You guys can see right below Rich's name is where you can find RoyaleMSTRS as we get ready for our semifinals. Here we go, hopping into game right now. Sandbox and Veners. This is going to be a very, very interesting one. Sandy, Going to try to hold that flag high for all those world finalists that have been there before.
An easy little King Tower activation. I feel like we've seen a little bit less NATO today than maybe we're used to in these matches, but either way, NATO timely play there out of Sandbox, who might be going minor wall breakers or be going a totally different direction now with this Phoenix. And again, we're seeing the Mighty Miner Firecracker combination to try to get the 3-card cycle mixed in with the power of those Evos.
Yeah, and a nice slow start here for Sandy, looking like he could be coming out with RG. Or GY, actually. I mean, this is...
Yeah, the cage feels more GY-ish, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or Electro Giant.
There we go. That's, I mean, yes. I keep forgetting that Electro Giant is kind of back a little bit. I mean, not really. It doesn't really that strong in terms of like the highest level ladder or on the UC leaderboard, but we are starting to see more people try it out once again. And running into a lot of problems here early on. Maybe is Sandbox, but the Lightning going to be really great in terms of cleanup. Wow.
And of course, once you get that Electro Giant in range of the tower, that's a different conversation. So able to get it close still. The damage lead just barely in his favor. Elixir lead favoring Vempers right now, who's going to have to figure out how he wants to actually get on tower. This is the right idea, right? Continue pressuring and in single Elixir Sandbox doing the full... He doesn't need that bar barrel. He could have countered that with just the Goblin Cage and Brawler by itself. I'm a little surprised he played the bar barrel there. And now we'll see Vempers cycle really quickly to get back to a Hog the opposite direction. There you go.
Yeah, really nice play there. Getting that Mighty Miner out front, going to use that bomb to push units away, which allows this Hog to get another big hit in. Really nice. 1871. And Sandbox kind of spread all over the board at the moment.
Yeah, he's trying to see if he can sneak this Evo Knight in for a few shots on the left-hand side. I don't think Vempers is going to allow that to happen, but you just see how much, especially in a game against a Cycle player, and Vempers letting that happen. A little bit shocking there. But you can see how much that 2 Elixir against a Cycle player can matter. Now, can you get the fire back in the opposite direction, Bar Barrel, to pick up after the Knight goes down to keep this Electro Giant up? Vempers, though, going to continue to cycle very quickly. I don't think he pressures offensively here. I think he just holds off and, yeah.
A little bit of trouble. I mean, that bar barrel actually causes so much difficulty because that Inferno does not do good work against that Electro Giant, and that is exactly what Sandbox needed to do. He recognized the biggest problem was the Inferno just having the sizzle on the E-Giant early. That's it. If you can stop that, then you can get the E-Spirit in, then you can get the Lightning in. The E-Spirit isn't going to be enough. You can NATO everything together. You get the E-Spirit, you get the Firecracker, you get the Skellies, and then now you have nothing there to block that E-Giant and the Inferno, and that's just a lot of trouble. You see there, Sandbox happy to steal the game. And that was really, really well played by Sandy. All he had to do was just get that one big sent in. We saw early on some good damage when Vempers, unfortunately, was going up against Lightning. He cycled the Firecracker in the back. He plays the Inferno in the normal spot, and he gets a ton of Lightning value early on. Then it was time for Vempers to get back on offense. We saw him doing a good job of switching lanes, getting good pressure, getting that Mighty Miner out, as you were calling out, Rich, going opposite lane once he baited out the Elixir on the right-hand side. But Sandbox goes, I need 2 E-Giants to win this entire thing. We got the one in early on. We got a lot of value from that Lightning, so it's an easy pull because you get the Firecracker, the Princess Tower, and the Inferno Tower. And then at the end of the game, what do? You just block that Inferno sizzle for just a little bit. That plus the Lightning and the NATO, GG, well played. There's just, the Firecracker is just not substantial enough, and the Skeletons. And also the E-Spirit. You want an Ice Spirit in that situation instead of the E-Spirit.
Yeah, that was interesting because I think the big damage we saw both came on the heels of minor overspends in both directions, right? So the first big chunk of damage from the Hog Rider for Vempers was after using both the Goblin Cage and the Barrel to defend against a Hog Rider, which Sandbox didn't need both of those to make that defense, so you got big damage that way. And then the other way, you had Vempers who made he cycled back around to Hog Rider, made a big push on the left-hand side, and then he activated that Mighty Miner ability to get just a little bit more damage out of that Hog Rider. I think he would have gotten similar damage, maybe not the same full field, but similar damage had he not wasted that 2 elixir, which then put him on the back foot, put him thirsting when he was trying to defend that Inferno Tower and defend against that Royal Giant, or that Electro Giant push.
So we'll see if we're going to see recruits in both directions, as obviously we see them at the bottom of the screen, but Skeleton Dragons at the top, usually paired with them, and there we go.
And I see someone saying cage was placed too high, so we had to use the bar barrel to cover. So, you know, if you'd place the cage 1 tile lower. And again, that's what I'm talking about with Sandbox this year. Sandbox has done a couple of plays, and that's just like we saw in the last round, right? A couple of plays where he just makes a defensive effort that falls a little bit short, that he could have played better, and it results in putting him behind. So
yeah, I mean, those cheap defenses that you see the best in the world pull off over and over is why they can get so aggressive offensively, and their opponents are hurting in their defensive elixirs. So it looks like Ram at the bottom of the screen, and then I saw someone ask, what does the X out of 8 mean in the matchup? That's how many cards are matching. So you'll see 6 of 8, 7 of 8 a lot, which is why when we have those matchup conversations, we always have to at least acknowledge the fact that the matchup that you're seeing on screen usually is not exactly what we're seeing in the game, because it's pretty tough to find an exact match of all 16 cards across the board.
Yeah, 8 of 8 would be that it's the exact same 2 decks that you see on screen. 7 of 8 would mean that at least one of the 2 decks has 1 card different that we don't have data on, and then so on and so forth. So, an imperfect science is matchup, which is why when you get into these more fluid competitive formats, you start to really find the value of those coaches, of those analysts who help you find those openings to really change things up.
So Fireball out for Venpers, so Sandbox does have a little bit of a opportunity to play his Mother Witch. We'll see if we just cycle her in the back, and there she is. And an interesting kind of mirror matchup here. Obviously, that Cage and the Heal Spirit, the 2 biggest changes thus far. And this Rage should be able to create a little bit of space, but Venpers has been getting some really nice Fireball value a couple times in a row here from Sandbox.
And he will get some more recruit value here on that right-hand side. 1470 in the left-hand lane, 2039, and arrows just to make sure that Mother Witch is not in the conversation. This is going to connect, I believe.
Yeah.
And wow, that's a lot of damage for Venpers taking here.
Yeah, 435 remaining. I really like that arrows to take care of the Mother Witch, but then you found himself just hurting a little bit defensively. Tough spot. You know, you really got to deal with that Mother Witch, though, because if she was in tow, who knows if that tower would even be standing. 1301 to 435.
And little lackadaisical.
Yeah. But this Heal Spirit now should be able to get a clean path through. Arrows is out. Fireball is out. And no connection. But a lot of recruits on the board. Right-hand side, both recruits on the tower. Sandbox does not have enough elixir for his own recruits. Lumberjack comes down to save, but that is not going to be enough. That's going to give a raged-up Ram Rider a path to the tower. Oh, my goodness.
And you see
Skeleton Dragons.
the Skeleton Dragons and the Fireball. Sandbox gave that up by going too aggressive in the previous push before that, and then tried to steal it with the double Skelly Drags Fireball connection. And Venpers nearly did a horse to the barn moment and gave up a steal the opposite direction, but was able to just hold on. And man, you see that Fireball was in the air. The Skelly Dragons were belching, just not quite able to beat out that raged up Ram Rider. And now we're going to a game number 3 that, you know, arguably should not have gotten here.
I mean, definitely. There's no reason to give the game up in the end there if you're Sandbox. I mean, I understand, we've talked about this for year after year after year. You get the idea why. You go Ram Rider, you go Lumberjack, you go Ram Rider, you go Heal Spirit, you go Rage. Because you're like, there's no way he can defend. The problem is that he's playing his Evo'd recruits. So if they were regular recruits, that's an okay push. You can probably still defend that right-hand side. But since they're Evo'd recruits, that overspend, you're getting lost in the cycle game there. You should know that your opponent has that Cage ready to go. Just because they used their fireball on the Mother Witch a second ago and they don't have a way to knock that Ram Rider back doesn't mean that they don't have a way to stop it. So Sandbox just gets caught looking there, gets a little bit overzealous, and a really nice play there by Veners.
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel good with a theft like that one. And really, just if that Ram Rider doesn't quite get there, we have a very different story here. Instead, going to game number 3 and taking a look at what's out. Cage out on both sides here. For Sandbox, NATO, Lightning not a big issue. The Evo Knight out. So Sandbox, lots of good options. Probably not going to go Graveyard here in this next game. Veners no longer has Mother Witch available, no longer has Fireball, Arrows, Ram Rider out as well, and Royal Recruits out. So very interesting. Lots of openings here for Sandbox. I expect that Veners will probably run something that either has Inferno Tower or Bomb Tower here in game number 3. So now it's Sandbox trying to figure out the coin flip here. It might, and that's interesting. He might go Bomb Tower because Recruits are still open for Sandbox.
If I'm Sandbox, I might just go to Goblin Giant Sparky. I mean, you can get Mother Witch in there, and you can create a lot of problems with that. Recruit's not a factor right now, and with that Monk coming down, most likely not going to be the case.
So, Drill Cycle for Veners.
RG. Definitely like him going RG.
Well, again, I think he probably got the read here that Inferno Tower was unlikely due to Recruits still being open for him. So knew he had a little bit more room to get RGs on tower and not get burned off. And great defensive sequence there from Sandbox as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was going to say Royal Giant, but Goblin Giant Sparky felt like a better matchup situation. But in history, Sandbox has been a much better Royal Giant player than obviously Goblin Giant Sparky, since Goblin Giant Sparky has just become popular over the last few months. Sandbox kind of a notorious Royal Giant player. So like what we're seeing here, like that it's a version with Mother Witch. The Monk is going to do a great job too. I mean, we got this Evoed Firecracker, and that is the last thing you want to see as a Firecracker player, because now you can just stack that Monk right up front, get the RG in the middle, Mother Witch is right behind, and your Bowler, your Cannon Cart, your Firecracker, all those cards just become really ineffective. And right now, Sandbox is using that Bowler against him.
Yeah, that you saw that one, and you're going, hey, Veners, maybe the Bowler needs to be another step to the inside. And now he's in a full send here on the left-hand lane. Electrospirit gets taken out, Log trying to clear, but Golden Knight will get on tower. Monk needs to get into reflect mode here, needs to ability, yeah, and there you go. Finally will hold and clean.
Yeah, and that is, Veners needs a lot of things to kind of come together perfectly with this deck just because of that Monk. That Monk is such trouble, and then the fact that you have not a big spell, at least you haven't shown one, means that Firecracker and Mother Witch are really going to be a nuisance. So Sandbox has all the right tricks right now. And again, you see, look how hard he's working to not get that Monk across the bridge. That is so much spent just to make sure a card doesn't get to a position.
And it still, wow. That's brutal. That's absolutely brutal. And this Mother Witch, like you said, you know, there's not a lot of perfect counters for the drill in this deck. And you see this NATO could be a problem. Wow, Cannon Cart still up, Bowler still up, Evo Firecracker on tower.
Bowler's on tower, Bowler's on tower, Evo's on tower.
This is what I was about to say here, is that Sandbox has been giving up moments like this. I saw someone in chat say GG already. You can't say that in this situation, and the pop from the drill will be enough. Veners puts Sandbox away here in game number 3. And once again, it's just been the challenge here for Sandbox, where, you know, he does a lot of the right things, but all it takes is one, and that one keeps creeping up. And he's gotten lucky today a few times. Does not get lucky here. Veners takes the dub and moves on to our semifinals.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for Sandbox is that he just continues to overextend himself when he does not need to. And that's not just defensively, unfortunately, Rich. That's offensively and defensively. And then you see, even at the end, if you're going back and watching those final seconds, he goes for a fireball on top of a bowler plus a cannon cart, but his fisherman pulls the cannon cart away. So the fireball is basically on top of a bowler. He misses the firecracker there. And it's just kind of mistake after mistake after mistake.
Yeah.
We talk about this cascading mistakes for years now. We've been saying that. But the problem with Sandbox is, just as we saw in game number 2, he's not only overspending defensively, he is coupling that with overspending offensively. And then his opponents keep finding themselves in these spots where they go, oh my gosh, I thought this game was over. And now Sandbox has just spent so much elixir on basically nothing that I could just sell at the bridge. That's it. And that's not a hard decision to make as his opponent. He doesn't even have to do anything fancy, does Venpers, because Sandbox has left the door so wide open.
And, you know, we were remiss to not mention this, that puts Venpers to our top 2, to our finals on our semifinals, which means that Venpers has qualified for our $10,000 playoffs next weekend. So congratulations, Venpers, on making it through to that next stage, to that final stage. He still has a chance to win this weekend's final and take home the top prize from the $2,000 set aside for this Wild Card Open. But more importantly, he is through to the big show next weekend.
Yeah, really, really well played there by Venpers, coming from behind in game number 2 and in game number 3 against a world finalist. And Sandbox just really struggling here in 2023 to make the right moves when the most is on the line. And, you know, in Finland, that was something that we talked about last year, just the nerves for a lot of the players, whether it be Arden, whether it was Pandora or Sandbox. Those nerves really, really are brutal in terms of that late game decision making. You and I went on a whole tangent about that elixir, or that decision making in triple elixir is so much more difficult than the best in the world make it look.
And spears to pressure on the right hand side, picked up by the Knight. And we have, this is a matchup that I feel like we saw a lot competitively. We have not seen much of this today. The faster cycle, Miner versus Miner. And those wall breakers could be a problem here, and they force the NATO out of Vitor.
Yeah, Tourist doing a great job so far and can continue to just get those miners in these funky spots at least early on, because Vitor's defenses have not been ideal. And I love the pressure we're seeing.
You gotta like that Electro Spirit for Vitor in this matchup, though. Gonna handle those bats pretty well most of the time. This might be a problem. Has to overspend on the bomb tower to control that one. And for the moment, Tourist up by 300 and change.
Yeah, and Tourist is doing exactly what you have to do with this deck, which is pressure, 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 get miner chip when you can, and then when your opponent makes a mistake with their cycle, or if their cycle is just a little bit funky, you've got to abuse it until they fix it. And the best players in the world, like Vitor, will be able to fix it, hopefully, for his case. But sometimes you just can't against these decks, and now we see Tourist doing a good job. He's going to create some opposite lane pressure as well. E-Spirit's out of cycle, so what do? You go bats opposite. Doesn't really get much out of it, though.
And finally, the connection for that King Tower activation could be at least a factor as we go forward. Maybe help get that miner down a little faster so the wall breakers don't slide right on through so easily. And I like this play out of Vitor, right? He decides to make this a pressure play instead of play defensively. He's got 2 Knights on the board. He goes with the E-Spirit high to clear out the path, and now he's going to get himself a little bit more damage and get this matchup in his favor for the moment.
And that's exactly what I was just talking about, was that, you know, Vitor did not have his cycle where he needed it to be. The E-Spirit wasn't where he wanted at times, and the bomb tower kept having to come out overspending against the wall breakers. But now that he's fixed it, that's where Tourist needs to take some pause and kind of jigger the way that he wants to put together these offensive pushes, because as you can see, Vitor is really capitalizing on this poison value, and of course that E-Spirit has been a big factor in success. Even right there, that last second E-Spirit is going to help, but now the bats can come down at the bridge, so we'll see what Vitor wants to do.
Good NATO to clear out, 688 to 1107. Bomb tower down early. Poison looking to get some value here. The defensive miner does not pick up. Vitor has to be careful here, does log that off, but now this is going to be very close. 736, 688 with under a minute and a half left. Tourist is in the game with his second most popular deck from the last week.
And I like this. Knight to the back, Xe up high, cleans up all those bats, doesn't catch the miner, but the Nado's going to pull it away. But bats cannot be played, at least on this send. And those aren't great wall breakers. That's going to give good chip damage, and they're not going to give any sort of value for Tourist. And this is where you're starting to really feel the pressure if you're Tourist. Another Knight to the back? No, goes to the side. Knight does go to the back. Miner goes to the side.
Miner doing a little more chip damage here now. Poison value and poison range. And that's going to be game number 1 for Vitor. Very well played here. A tight one. This final, I feel like we didn't have the pressure at the end that this felt like. This was a close battle the entire way through. Vitor just able to do a couple of things to step out in the lead. And now he is 1 win away from next weekend's playoffs.
I mean, and that is really when we go back to talking about breaking down the best of the best of the best, those S tier players and then the A tier players. Turista did a really excellent job all throughout that game. I mean, literally he's winning if that game is just, one hit difference and he's able to get his poison down and another miner in. But Vitor, he did a really excellent job. He took so much damage early on. His cycle was super, super funky. But what happened was when he was able to fix that cycle, that E-Spirit got so much value time and time again. And then Vitor was able to turn his Knight plus miner pushes with poison value into so much more than what Tourist was getting. And then we saw a couple times where Tourist was feeling the pressure and he just sent a couple of ill-advised offensive sends. Even if it's something as cheap as wall breakers, there's no reason to just send naked wall breakers at the bridge when A, your opponent has login cycle, and B, has units on the board, and C, you have no tank, right? So all these things kind of adding together to make very small mistakes for Tourist where Vitor is able to capitalize. And it's almost hard to call them mistakes because he was so close, but that's the difference right there.
Well, Tourist did play it relatively well, but as you said, small mistakes here. And Tourist, if you talk about him, what he leans on, kind of more of a classic player with P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam. Obviously, P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam really not in the meta right now. So, you talk about a difference in play style. You talk about a difference in comfort level. If you're someone who grinds ladder with a specific deck, you're now being asked to change things up when you play in competitions like this. And some people develop that depth. Some people don't develop that depth. But, now that we go into our second game, let's talk a little bit about what we saw in game number 1 and what was played by Vitor. Bomb Tower now out, Xe now out. Turista is pretty good with Royal Hogs, right? So you have 2 primary counters to Royal Hogs, also Log Out as well, and the Electro Spirit for that kind of like chunk them all down. I suspect that Vitor will play Fireball here in game number 2, but a Fireball bait variation of Royal Hogs, even though Tourist tends to favor a cycle variation, might be a good call here.
Yeah, I actually really like that. I think Fireball bait, Royal Hogs, get Cage in there as well with Flying Machine. That's going to be a really good way to maybe get to Vitor. He doesn't have the ability to kind of NATO everything together. Poison's not there. Bomb Tower's not there. I like that. Recruit's probably going to be played by Vitor. It feels like that's probably where you go with your second Evo with Knight out.
And Tourist going to go Minor Wall Breakers Recruits instead.
And Vitor does go to Recruits.
And almost gets the Mother Witch. Bar Barrel will come out and take care of the Dart Goblin.
And there's a kind of an example of talking about that reaction time. I mean, Goblins still came down, but they were just a second late to protect that Dart Goblin, and that ends up being kind of a wasted couple elixir, although it does get this Fish Boy out for Vitor. A lot of bait on the board for that Mother Witch, but of course Fireball had to be in hand if you're Tourist running all these cards, knowing Mother Witch was still available for Vitor.
Yeah, he'll be happy to have that as time goes on, especially given the deck that he's playing. Going double bait here is an interesting choice, and he's going to try to see if he can get this out of the way, but the Bar Barrel there to clean up. That is not a competitive level move. That's a on my way to top 1,000 ranked move. You have to expect that Vitor's ready for that.
Yeah, you can't just go bait push at the bridge with Skellies and wall breakers behind when the timing isn't even giving you an opportunity to make your opponent have to spend twice on it. Dark Goblin, though, almost stays alive. Definitely alive is this Phoenix. We'll see if Vitor wants to support it all. Only 4 elixir in hand, probably won't.
We'll force out a little something there, and there you go. A wall breaker Kite is the answer from Tourist. who does get a connection from that. And a pretty big lead, too.
2378 to 2893 as Vitor sets up these Evo recruits in the back. And I have to play something up high. And there goes the Fish Boy to deal with the Dark Goblin and should be able to pull the Mighty Miner.
This is interesting because we're not seeing much in the way of splash out of this deck for Vitor, and I don't know if we're going to. And as time goes on and Tourist can kind of just spread the board out a whole lot, might cause some problems, especially if Tourist can get the, and again, he goes with the same idea here, but the Bar Barrel early, and Vitor may be a little out of sorts with that defense.
Yeah, and then you see him even leaking Elixir on top of that because that defense not going the way he wanted, was trying to decide if he needed to spend more to deal with the ensuing push, ends up now at 4 Elixir leaked against his opponent who's barely leaked any. And these pushes are starting to become much better timed by Tourist, making that barrel have to come down exactly at the correct time, and that Mother Witch being up high to make sure that you can at least try to bait something out of your opponent.
A lot of this was about not making mistakes in single for Tourist and getting caught by a nasty Royal Giant counter push. And other than that slight overextension, which Vitor couldn't capitalize on, he's done pretty well with this. So now we'll see Mighty Miner plus the Spears, or plus the Goblin Gang, which is there to prevent against the Fisherman, pulling that Mighty Miner, and he shuts that down pretty well. So many spammy cards here counter this Fisherman very nicely. This is going to be very difficult for Vitor to battle back into. This really feels like it is Tourist's game to win.
Yeah, and now Vitor trying to change up his defenses a little bit on this left-hand side, getting that Phoenix out early to get on top of the Skeleton Barrel. But still, I mean, this has been a very, very relentless send from Tourist, and we've seen this a couple times here today. Now Mother Witch on the board. Vitor just playing a little out of sorts here.
Well, he's just trying to figure out how the heck do I get past all of this, and especially when my Fisherman is kind of a non-factor in this game. He's really only to do that. He's able to get a shot in here or there, and then has to use this Bar Barrel on these recruits, and then now he's trying to figure out how do I defend against this double push.
Yep. Yeah, this is brutal. Now you get Dark Goblin stacking up, another Skeleton Barrel in tow, Wall Breakers on the right-hand side.
Mighty Miner on the right.
And that's which tower falls first is the question, right?
Great game there by Tourist. Great deck pick by Tourist as well, who really got a good read and just completely painted Vitor into a corner.
Yeah, I mean, that is unfortunately for Vitor a situation where he would have loved to swap his Evos around, right? Even if you just have regular recruits, which is not anything that you really want, but having go to RG would have been really, really great had he been able to get that in instead. Then when you get to the other side of the board, that's a completely different conversation. Yes, the Mighty Miner's there, but those recruits do less damage. The Dark Goblin maybe has to be used defensively instead of offensively every single time. But Tourist, that's not the case for him. He just recognizes, if I just keep spamming, there is no way you're going to be able to defend this. And he learned pretty quickly, right? We saw a couple of those Skeleton Barrel Wall Breakers pushes that are ill-advised. They're very reminiscent of like an Ice Spirit late at the bridge in a Goblin Barrel. You just play one log and you get it all off the board. No reason to do that. And as the game went on, you started to see Tourist send his offense in layers upon layers upon layers. Skeleton Barrel, then you get the Wall Breakers, then you get the Goblin Gang, then the Dark Goblins behind, and then by that time you're already back to another Skeleton Barrel. So very, very nicely played. And like you said, man, great deck pick.
And the layers were part of the challenge, right? That Vitor is trying to solve. And now again, talking about the challenges to solve, let's talk about the cards that are out here. Tourist no longer able to play Mighty Miner, those two bait cards. There could be a Miner control deck in here for Tourist as a possibility, but seems like that might not be the move, although Miner control Xe with a building to pick up the RG. We haven't seen people go back to the same deck very much today, and it feels like everyone's trying to do this next level outplay concept where it seems like there's some good opportunities to just go, hey, you played a bunch of good, you get a great matchup that time, let's see a different matchup here.
Yeah, you know, and I know I've said it a couple times, but now it really does feel like a good opportunity to go to Goblin Giant. I mean, there's a reason why it's the center of the conversation, the nerf conversation, the balance conversation. Now, if you're Vitor, the biggest problem that Goblin Giant, Sparky plus Mini P.E.K.K.A runs into is the fact that there's no Royal Recruits available, right? Those Royal Recruits not being available, all the other Evos become just a little bit more manageable. With arrows and Rage, you can take out that Firecracker, and with your ensuing push with your Goblin Giant, whether you have Mini P.E.K.K.A behind or Sparky behind, that Evo Knight is just a little bit less threatening, a little bit easier to get on top of. So not sure if that's the way Vitor goes. He's not really known for playing a lot of that, but again, everyone is kind of playing it right now.
So here we go. Tourist going to split Barbs in the back, and Vitor going to Recruits. We have not seen much in the way. Have we seen? This might be our first time seeing Evo Barbs today.
Yeah, I was thinking about them earlier, and really the conversation went from, oh, is it Evo Barbs? Oh, it's probably Evo Knight. Oh, Royal Recruits are really good, but Barbs are still in there. And then over the last couple of weeks, it feels like Barbs have just kind of completely fallen off.
Well, it's also a feature of this format, right? Where you don't have to have 3 decks for a best of 3. You can really have 2. You can lean on the Evo Knight and the Evo Recruits a bit more, since you can repeat cards you lose with. And the Evo Barbs are just kind of, they get a lot of play in the standard dual mode, but in the Masters dual mode, they play second fiddle to the more valuable evolutions.
And the Recruits definitely a valuable evolution here, as the first set of Evo Recruits come down here for Vitor.
And Tourist just making sure that Mother Witch is not part of this conversation as time goes on. He's have to spend that Firecracker or those arrows snowball consistently on that Mother Witch. That's going to be a negative trade, and also just taking them away from other parts of the board. Let's see if Vitor is able to capitalize on things like the Skeleton Dragons here.
I'm pretty sure this is a graveyard deck that we're seeing here from Tourist, and that Fireball is going, that Mother Witch is going to be just a nuisance. Vitor should be able to get back to, I was going to say Recruits or Fireball. Fireball comes down there, but still takes a good amount of damage.
Yeah, it's those Evo Recruits. They're just thick.
Yeah. Or Barbs.
Evo Barbs, I mean, yeah.
And we'll see if a GY even needs to come down anytime soon. That damage that just came in for Tourist was just a gift from Vitor.
And again, ready for snowball arrows every single time.
And Mother Witch out of cycle now. We'll see what happens here on this left-hand side. Roots up high. Should be relatively easy to clean up. Skeleton King is there for some splash.
Inferno Dragon just out of range of the Princess Tower, though. So even though the Recruits don't really worry about it as much, it is able to stay up there. It does end up feeding the Mother Witch, and man, single-minded focus with those spells here. RG Fireball gets in. This is a regular RG, not Evo'd. So it goes down very quickly, and now Graveyard in, and Vitor going to defend with Goblins.
Yeah, and those Goblins defensively just change the conversation up with that Mother Witch, but man, for someone that has a Mother Witch against a Graveyard deck, Vitor has really struggled to find a place for her. You know, snowball arrows every single time, but now you don't have those coupled together, but it doesn't matter. Graveyard already came through. The moment has passed.
I really don't see how Vitor gets a lot of Royal Giant damage on here. It's going to be very difficult for him to break through. He doesn't have great ways to clear the path for the Royal Giant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why he's leaning on this Mother Witch to create some pressure, and now he's going to get the RG down, but just as, you know, second verse, same as the first. Every single time, you know, that RG comes down, those Barbs are going to be right there, just the exact same way that Tourist has seen. Every time that Mother Witch comes down, it's arrows plus snowball.
And now we should see the Mother Witch is right onto it rather than behind his King Tower, and that's going to be... He was trying to get her to defend a little bit physically, but that's just not going to do it. Vitor, in a world of hurt right now, will take a miracle to get back and win this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's just absolutely no way unless Tourist just decides to make a huge mistake. I mean, even splitting those Barbs is totally fine. You still have the Tombstone, and this deck cycles really quickly. Should be able to get one more card down and then another set of Barbarians. And there you go.
Arrows don't quite kill. Fireball in, does get one Royal Giant shot, 17 seconds left, and a Graveyard down, though.
Four Skeleton Dragons! That's a lot of skelly drags, Rich.
Can they belch enough? The arrows are in, trying to clear enough room.
That's it.
Oh my word! Oh
That's gonna
my
do
word!
it.
How
Oh
in
my
the
goodness.
world did he win that?
4 skeleton dragons is how. Vitor recognizes, look, you want to get my Mother Witch off the board, that means whatever else is real fireball bait needs to stay alive. So, you know, it's hard to say that it was a planned move for Vitor to bait out the arrow snowball right on top of that tower, but as soon as those came down, you got goblins, then you got the first set of skeleton dragons, then you get the recruits down, and then you get the I think the RG, and then the second set of skeleton dragons come down again, and then you're in a spot where if you're tourist, you go, am I worried about those skelly drags, or do I just want to get a graveyard on tower? And I think he makes the wrong decision and decides to get the GY down as that second set of skelly drags comes in. Just a beautiful 4 skelly drag tower take to end that game.
I don't know if we have replay available for that one, but if we do, it'd be great to go back and take a look at that wild finish. And we do have a replay available for that one, so let's go take a look at the way the last few moments there, because it seemed like Tourist had this thing all tied up with a bow. 1443 on that right-hand tower to 331 with 24 seconds left. And I believe this RG gets one shot here, which is the all-important shot, 1136. Let's take a look at this graveyard. All the skelly dragons, and he defends the skeleton dragons here. I wonder if getting the mother, I mean, look, that's so, he's so kind of caught between two things, right? He doesn't know which one to do. Do you defend the skeleton dragons? Do you support the graveyard? And he kind of gets stuck between two choices and throws good elixir after bad there at the end.
I mean, it's easy for me to say. I mean, I think you probably defend those skeleton dragons because at least you know defensively you have the tombstone, you have the zappies, you have the barbarians. There's at least a chance, right?
Yeah.
But the problem with those skeleton dragons undefended is you're just going to take 4 belches. Like that's almost I think that's close to 1,000 damage if I'm not mistaken, and that is just too much to take. And this is again horse to the barn syndrome, Rich. We've seen it a lot today. Yes, this is a little bit harder to fault Tourist because it is such a close race to the finish, but that Mother Witch coming down to defend your graveyard, you know that's going to happen, right? So you've got to spend that elixir defensively. If you're not going to use the snowball arrows on offense, you've got to use them earlier on defense. And unfortunately, if you throw a graveyard in the mix there, that's just too much elixir on the board that Vitor has demanded out of you. And that was just, I mean, you saw, I mean, the chat the whole time, Vitor choke, Vitor noob. How did Vitor lose this? Vitor, and this is again why he is a world-class player. Is even when you and I had felt that game was lost for over a minute, he still steals it in the final seconds.
He did the one thing that would do it, right? Was he made Tourist make a choice, and Tourist made a bad choice. A naked graveyard when you're up 1,000 HP in the final few seconds. That just ain't it. That just ain't it. And so Vitor made him make a choice, and Tourist made the wrong one. And now when we take a look at our bracket, we can see the results of that one. Vitor has now qualified for our $10,000 playoff weekend, which will be, of course, just 6 days from now. Starting Saturday next weekend, he and Veners still have our grand final matchup on the day. And, of course, Sandbox and Tourist will be playing for that third place spot. Today, of course, all 4 of these players getting at least $100. The winner of our third place match will make it to $200. And, of course, Vitor and Veners playing for that first prize of $600. But the big prize already won, both of them going through to next weekend. And that's going to be an absolute blast. And, Andrew, we do have 2 more matches left. But first, a short break. So, you know, refill your snacks, get a little bit of water in you, and come back ready for our last 2 matches of the day. Welcome back, everybody, to our final pair of matches in this wild card open. We've already figured out who is going to be attending the grand final, the playoffs next weekend, that $10,000 event. But we still have more prize pool on the line, and when we get into our finals, a really key element of that grand final matchup that might determine the fate of those two players. Stay tuned for more on that later. Right now, though, Andrew, we have our third place matchup. Both these players guaranteed at least $100. This essentially is a $100 best of three, with third place walking home with $200 today.
Yeah, double it up. Why not? This is going to be between Turista and Sandbox, which is going to be actually a very, very good third place matchup here. Honestly, the struggles from Sandbox today were really just about overspending offensively and defensively. We saw it a handful of times. Turista on the other side of it, it didn't really feel like there was as many cracks in the armor, which is kind of hard to quantify in the sense that you would expect Sandbox to be cleaner throughout the day. But as we talked about, Rich, this has been the story of him in 2023 and even a bit of the end of 2022, right? A really, really great player. He's just got to have a little bit more faith, I think, in his defenses, or he just needs to clean up the micro of his defenses just a little bit. Tourist on the other side of it, we've seen a lot of good stuff today, but he's just run into some really dominant forces.
Yeah, I mean, Tourist, there were a couple of moments that weren't phenomenal, and here we go, joining this game already in progress as the players definitely want to move along. Tourist looking a little spammy here with the Archer Queen and the Royal Ghost. MK Hog for Sandbox. You talk about those challenges for Sandbox, and again, it's just been consistent. And look, here goes Tourist. Tourist is a bridge spam player, deciding to go bridge spam here. So if you like seeing Tourist do what he does, decided to go with a little fan service here in this third place matchup.
Yeah, great job, Tourist, using that ability to distract to get the MK off the Archer Queen, then the Heal Spirit plus that Battle Ram, and he turns that into a really, really nice offensive push. 2480 now to 2734. The Elixir conversation, though, a little bit different, and a great Heal Spirit again. And this is just a bad start for Sandy.
Yeah, it's a rough one here, and throws that right into some barbs that will wipe the Hog Rider off the board. And yeah, this comes back to a lot of the challenges of Sandbox, which has been decision making, right? Whether it be some deck choice stuff or, more importantly, some of these decision making in key moments. It's been the big challenge for him, for a player who's historically been so good at Clash Royale, right? You talk about Sandbox's history with this game. He was already a really good player during the Teams era, didn't play in CRL teams, but was already playing pretty well outside of that. But then really in 21, 22, and beyond, he's been mostly pretty solid. He made it to World Finals in 21, made top 12, made top 6 in 22. And then just this year, I'm curious what he thinks the big factor is, but it just he has not been the same player.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is you wonder with guys like Sandbox and, like Lucas, for instance, if just the evolutions do not fit their style of play. And I know that's such a broad statement, and it feels like it's something that you should be able to maybe fix, but I don't know. It just seems like in this game of evolutions, we've seen Lucas have a little bit of success, and we've seen players like Sandbox just kind of struggle throughout.
Certainly as the game evolves, some players stay with it, and some players have to find another way to success.
Great lineup
so
there
far,
from that High Magic Archer.
I mean, I don't think Sandbox also thought that Tourist was going to go bridge spam, even though that's what he's known for. I think that Sandbox thought maybe Tourist would play something more in the competitive meta. And you saw Sandbox trying to. You can fully counter that Bandit, by the way, with that Hog to the opposite lane. You can have the Hog move just in time that the Bandit hits air and is fully countered. The timing on that is absolutely brutal to work out appropriately, though.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about what's been going on, I think a big part of it is just because Sandbox has been on his back foot for so long, is, this is the only version of bridge spam that is viable, but the biggest part of it, which we're finally seeing come into practice right now, I mean, this could be enough, is the Evo to Firecracker, Rich. There's no reason not to abuse the Evo to Firecracker. Gets another shot right now, but does he have enough? Just a little overspend there, but my goodness, your opponent, this deck, it only has arrows. You know that. The moment you see Royal Ghost and Archer Queen, sure, we'll throw in the battle ram for good, good measure. You know exactly what the rest of this deck is. It's Heal Spirit, it's Bandit, it's Barbs, it's it's Magic Archer, and then a small spell. So what do you do in that case? Exactly what he did, just a little bit too late, which is abuse that Firecracker. Just abuse it for the entire game.
Yeah, that was an insane swing there at the end. And this is kind of been the story of the day for both of these players, right? Big back and forth swings near the end, close finishes, and Sandbox once again coming on the short side of the stick here. And this was hard for him because, the best counter to his Hog Rider is those barbs on the side of Tourist. And if you look at his spells, he has no real way to get on those barbs. You talk about the Firecracker being, maybe, abusing that Firecracker, trying to get that through damage. It's really dangerous to do that in single, to spend that 8 and then have the Mega Knight set up for a push the opposite direction. There's some danger there, especially with the Ghost and the Prince able to get at that Firecracker right over the bridge. This was a tough situation for Sandbox, who made it very, very close. Tourist went with his best. Right? So now the question is, does Tourist have what it takes to keep winning now that his comfort is no longer playable?
One evoed Firecracker that whole game, and I don't know if that is more of a comment on Sandbox or more of a compliment to Tourist, but either way, the X factor in that matchup was only recognized at the very end, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it also speaks to the deck that Sandbox was playing there, right? That very heavy, that wasn't a Hog Cycle deck, that was Hog MK Prince, right?
So all the cheapest cards were barely played. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. No, it's hard to get. You can't get that Firecracker on the board a whole lot, which is an interesting challenge of when you're trying to play that deck. And here we go. Sandbox looking like drill.
And clearly going to be Goblin Giant when you see even just the Rage starting things off. And Goblin's going to need a little bit of support. E-Drag going to do just enough for that mini P.E.K.K.A. All the while, the Bowler just hanging out on that right-hand tower. Tourist going for a full send tower trade situation where he thought he was going to come out on top. Ends up about 500 behind.
Yeah, good sequence there for Sandbox as the first 90 seconds are gone. And Tourist going to keep on trying to pound this left-hand lane, it looks like. Electro Dragon is an interesting wrinkle in all of this one.
Yeah, I mean, the NATO's going to be in there, so Sandbox here really going for the pull things together and splash them down with the Bowler, the Firecracker, the Golden Knight, and the E-Drag. Will it work? I don't know, but that connection is helpful. And
dramatically.
I was like, did he lag out? But no, just waiting to drop that mini P.E.K.K.A.
Yeah, taking his time and now getting the Evo Knight in front of the Goblin Giant. Dark Prince will get pulled back into this, I think. No, it just runs away. I thought the Dark Prince would come back and assist on that defense. Instead goes and forces out the Dark Prince from his opponent on the opposite side. Sandbox now with a lot on the board here and pretty easy defense.
Yeah, that was really fortunate for Sandbox just because it changed up how Tourist was going to be able to play that offense and ended up having to spend more than he would have liked defensively. Now this Firecracker on the board for Sandbox does not get close enough to that Knight, but damage in regardless.
A ton of damage as well. 1169 on the right-hand tower. And, Sandbox really, Tourist really has one phenomenal counter to the drill, and that's the Dark Prince, but we're seeing the result of that Dark Prince being forced to play out of cycle when he had to play it against the Dark Prince, and now just not having it when he wants and having to go for imperfect defenses against these Goblin drills.
Yeah, Sandbox's deck is also just so beefy. If you look at what Tourist has for single target TPS, it's basically the mini P.E.K.K.A. and the minions. Everything else is just a little bit lower than you would like.
1907 left-hand lane. Now Sandbox sets up his Dark Prince to the right-hand side. Under 90 seconds left. Tourist can take a tower in the blink of an eye, but has to find a way through.
Drill to the center here, and we'll see a Firecracker, maybe even a NATO. Nope, doesn't need it. Things line up perfectly. Yeah.
The luxury of the defensive drills here is so nice. now that Sandbox has the damage lead.
And that's a really great point that he needs to recognize and hold on to for as long as he can. Right here, he's creating great pressure with the Evo'd Firecracker. Oh, and the miss Fireball, that might be the game. Anytime you miss that spell on that card specifically, things become very, very expensive to stop the bleeding.
And Electro Dragon does need to clean up this Dark Prince before it connects, and now full send left-hand lane. Bowler does a good job of cleaning up the support. NATO to pull back. And that makes it so hard to do what this deck is so good at, which is overwhelm a lane, when you can actually get the Bowler NATO to lock down that defense.
Nothing up high to protect. Yes, there's something to protect the Firecracker. Would have loved to see the drill, and perfect timing on all. A great sequence by Sandbox. Protects the Firecracker, gets the drill out offensively. Not only does the drill get back on offense and bait out defensive elixir from Tourist, it also turned that Goblin Giant around, just completely ending the game. A nice win there for Sandbox as we head to game number 3.
Yeah, and you know, the big difference there was clean, clear-headed defensive plays.
Yes.
Right? Didn't over-push on offense, didn't have any of the defensive mistakes that we've seen from him today on defense. And that NATO to turn the Goblin Giant back to the drill, that's the right time to do it, when the clock is counting down and you know that you can beat it out here in triple elixir. So not trying to get fancy with it early, instead making the play late at the right time and getting a very, very nice win against Tourist to send us here to game number 3.
And I love the aggressive Firecrackers. He used them defensively only until it was Evo'd, and every single time that Evo'd Firecracker was available, he went aggressive, whether it was up high at the bridge or up high in the center of the river, and that's when he'd get that Goblin Drill back in as well, and that's when he'd get the NATO in. So it was about making sure you were defending adequately, right, efficiently, as we've been talking about all day with Sandbox, and then not doing desperation offensive pushes. They were still very nicely orchestrated, whether it was, you know, adding all those things together or even just pieces of that, because that Firecracker Evo'd alone just creates so much defensive elixir from your opponent, and also mistakes, right? We saw that miss Fireball, and that's really, really trouble there. So great job in Sandbox recognizing, all right, game number 1, I didn't use my Evo to its utmost. Maybe that wasn't my fault, maybe it was, but in game number 2, I'm gonna make sure I'm not gonna do that again. Evo'd Firecracker did a lot of work.
Well, NATO, Bowler now both out for Sandbox, and we talk about Tourist deck pool. When you start getting outside of his primary deck pool, he again tends to favor Cycle. So Royal Hog Cycle, Hog Rider Cycle, Miner as well. So a lot of those options now out. He does still have Miner available, does still have Hog available, and does still have Royal Hogs available. All 3 of those nice options here, especially with NATO no longer there for Sandbox, and he goes Hog Rider.
Hog Rider in the back. Interesting start.
Yeah, we're seeing some players do this same sort of thing. Obviously, the most well-known one would be the way that Mohamed Light has begun opening with wall breakers in the back. And it's, instead of forcing someone to make a reflexive play, it's forcing someone to hold on to their elixir for a second before they make the correct defensive play. Your goal is to get them to leak a little bit as they wait to make that decision and try to get elixir advantage early on.
We'll see if this is the Skeleton Barrel Arrows deck, or if there is going to be difficulty in controlling an Evo'd Firecracker later on.
And forcing a little bit more out of Sandbox on the right-hand side. That may have been an ill-advised set of goblins as they just feed the elixir pool of Sandbox, and now the high mortar.
Yeah, I like that play. It's just kind of making a little bit more pressure than you'd like. Does even get a shot on tower. Activates King Tower. This is your healthier of the 2 towers, so you're willing to sacrifice this final Firecracker shot, and Sandbox finds himself in a great position after that sequence.
Curious to see how Sandbox will choose to handle the Firecrackers as time goes on. You mentioned the spell question. Miner also a factor. Log really seems to only have one target that it needs for a Tourist, and that's that Dark Goblin. I guess the gang also are a feature that he has to worry about as well. And wow, that is going to be a lot of damage on the right-hand side as those Skelly Dragons stay up.
Yeah, I mean, EQ was used, log was used, firecracker not where you want it, and that's just a tough bit of damage you got to take. Sandbox, great job in recognizing that, and then he's able to just control this Hog Rider now, because I think EQ is maybe one card away or doesn't need, you do not want to spend that much right there, and I'm sure that was maybe the last time we see Turista EQ cycle on top of recruits passing by a Princess Tower.
And now trying to get the firecracker abuse early, and oh, that just fed the fireball. Goblins come down, so instead of a -1 trade for Sandbox, a +1 trade. And now let's see if he pours it on, as he's feeling pretty good right now to that moment.
Yeah, I like both plays here. I like that Sandbox gets the mortar down to create some pressure, but I also like that placement on that Hog Rider to kite the mortar and get a swing on the tower. This is going to be the toughest defense for Turista. Now should be able to get that Dark Goblin down. Maybe on the left-hand side? No, he just splits the gang, still waiting to pull the trigger on it. Maybe he was seeing to see if Turista was going to play that bomb tower a little higher than he would have liked. Now Dark Goblin comes back down after that EQ is used to clean up the skellies.
Oh, and if he has to log here, doesn't have to log. Good for Turista, but now a 4 elixir advantage for Sandbox, and he does the easy thing, sets up recruits in the back.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the point where Sandbox can no longer use the mortar for anything other than defenses, because you can just control the board otherwise. There's not a good way to get a lot of damage in on all these units, so just save the mortar for those hog pushes. Yes, if you get a hog EQ push, that's something that you'll have to deal with when it comes, but otherwise, you just need to start really controlling the board and overwhelming your opponent. These hog EQ decks really struggle with the overwhelm game late.
1175 right-hand lane, but the left-hand lane is where the fight's taking place now, so a lot right here at the bridge. Does he have to stop the hog? He might need to. Does take a shot, but does that shot turn into enough elixir for some real damage here? Goes mortar high, opposite side, Turista looking to control, and he might come out the better for this one.
Yeah, really nice Mighty Miner timing there. Skeleton Dragon still locks on the tower, though. 530 remains. Hog Rider coming in. Mortar not in cycle here for Sandbox, Rich. And this is back to the conversation we've had so many times today. There's no reason to not have that mortar at this moment. It's the only way you can lose the game.
And then Fireball gets in to support the Miner very late in the opposite direction. Mortar played high, at least this version will pick up a hog if necessary. Miner in, EQ opposite direction, a Fireball will win it, doesn't need it. Sandbox does take the victory by 58 HP.
And an EQ ticking away. That was a lot closer than I think Sandbox wanted it to be. And I just feel a little bit of that mortar play late game could have been tightened up. You understand why he wanted to create pressure with it. He kept doing it, but the thing is that there's so many easy ways for Turista to control the board with the Mighty Miner, with the Goblins, with the Bomb Tower. Then you can EQ the right-hand side if you really need to. There's just so much that makes it difficult for that mortar to get on top of tower. I would have loved to see it just a little bit more defensive late game, but Sandbox still, struggling. 58 HP, he'll take it.
Yeah, he'll take it. I mean, look, a lot of those mortars were played single lane rather than played in the middle where they could pull hogs as well, and I understand why, because you're worried about the firecracker sniping, you're worried about the bomb tower sniping it as well, especially since the bomb tower wasn't needed as much for the rest of the defense, although, of course, the recruits needed the bomb tower was needed for those recruits as well. So I understand some of what Sandbox was doing there, but either way, the end result is the one he needed, which is he got the dub, got the extra $100, and despite not making it to next weekend's $10,000 playoff event, still had an overall nice showing here on this beautiful Sunday. And speaking of a nice showing, we're getting ready for our grand final on the day. Now, it might seem like the stakes are already done, right? Both of these players have qualified to that grand final next weekend. But Andrew, the winner here gets maybe, especially you talk about historically, and especially in a bracket tournament like this one, the most important reward that one of these two players can get. Tell them what it is.
It's being on the opposite side of the bracket as Mohamed Light. And I know you guys hear us talk about him relentlessly, but there's no reason not to. If you are in a tournament, you have already upped your chances of making it to the second, the third round if you are just on the other side as Momo, because, you know, he's been known to get knocked out early and then go down and work through that lower bracket. But as we've seen in 2023, he's cleaned that up quite a bit. I mean, you cannot win as many monthly finals as he did by just going through the lower bracket every every single time. So the win today is imperative. You talk about that $10,000 prize pool. Well, obviously it goes up and up every single time you make it through an opponent, you make it to another round. And I think if you're anyone in the world, you want to be on the other side of the bracket as Mo Light. So that's really what feels like is up for grabs today. $200 is really nice, but an opportunity to work through day one unscathed is even better next weekend.
Yeah, and especially because the loser here does get Mohamed Light directly, not the same side of the bracket. That is your first round opponent on that next Saturday, which is obviously not how you want to begin your playoff contention. And of course, Vitor, good friends and teammates with Mo, would love to avoid that. Venpers probably even more so.
Congrats to both these guys making it all the way through to next weekend already. This will be our best of 5, which is going to be a lot of fun to see. Vitor doing okay. I was going to say Vitor going with something directly in the meta though in terms of Hog Rider and Firecracker, but then changes it up a bit, going back to this MK deck that we've seen a lot here today and a lot over the last few days on ladder.
Yeah, you're just trying to use other support cards and preserve that minor. And you know, I'm still 50-50 on this deck overall.
Same.
But we're seeing it a lot, and that's going to be a nice little bit of hog damage there. NATO will pull things in.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think that if you're just going to use Hog Firecracker, you might as well just use all the rest of the cards that they usually come with. But when you get to a best of 5, it just changes that conversation a little bit. Even though this is the first best of 5 we're seeing today, this is where I think this deck is, and this composition of this deck is maybe the most impactful.
Prince to the left-hand lane. Golden Knight. Good timing from Venpers to not absorb the charge.
But still, a great lead here for Vitor.
And not going to go NATO here to control. Instead, takes the shot and sets up for a counterplay. And Venpers not gonna push behind this. And he does get the I thought the Electro Dragon might stay a little bit longer, but the Ghost goes back into its invisible form.
We'll see how Venpers wants to deal with this Evoed Firecracker. Already getting value, getting damage on that left-hand tower. Now going to get a little bit of damage on this bowler as the Hog will connect for one shot.
Almost gets 2 there. 1938 right-hand lane, 1511 on the left-hand side. Bats now to clean up all of this, and you really can't be playing a NATO here. Fireball takes out the evolved Firecracker. Vitor needs to control the bowler, and he does. Prince high. Does he go with dual lane pressure here? And he does. Hog goes to the opposite side. Goblins to try to clean it up. He will get one shot there. So Venpers trying to find some way to get a clean defense and turn it into offense, but so far has not made it happen.
That was a really nice NATO, though, cleaning up all of the biggest problem cards for Venpers, which is the Bats and the Firecracker. When you don't have a good way to get on top of them, that E-Drag NATO combo is going to be the best way to deal with all of those units. And if you're able to get both the Bats and the Firecracker in that one E-Drag shot, that is a huge, huge win for Venpers. I can't imagine that Vitor makes that an easy pull from here on out. And those arrows are going to come down. There they are.
About to say you might finally see Mega Knight here in that sequence. Hadn't been a good opportunity for it earlier. And this is aggressive from Vitor. That Ghost is his, by far, best response to the drill. And sending Ghost there on offense that can be countered by 2 like that. Gonna have to find another way here to play this defense. NATO should pull the Hog, and this is going to be a pretty big opportunity for Venpers to get some damage.
Yeah, and that bowler does line up. One more shot should come in. Does. 1335 to 1083. Gap narrows by just a hair. These Royal Ghosts opposite lane are just enough to be annoying. There's the arrows to bait out more elixir. Now the bowler has to come down, and now your cycle is just out the window.
And the Evo Firecracker getting some really great chip damage.
Yeah.
Down to 586.
And the
Ghost back in cycle. Wow.
Yep, Ghost is there, MK is there. Now this dual lane pressure is absolutely terrifying. Should be enough for another Firecracker to come down soon in the middle. There it is to support those Bats.
Goblins just barely get down there in time as the Electro Dragon is trying to hold on here. Going to have to NATO. And this is one of the problems, too, is that the primary way here for Vitor to get damage is either Firecracker Bowler And this Firecracker might get some chip here. No, out of range. Or NATO with the Goblin Drill, but Vempers has to save that NATO for Hogs, except for this happens, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it really did just feel like that entire last couple minutes, Vempers was just reacting to whatever Vitor was sending his way, but to almost negative elixir and damage every single time. And he was just on his back foot for what felt like, 80% of that.
Yeah, and this was just NATO having to do too many jobs at once, having no really great alternative to defend against that Hog, trying to defend against the Royal Ghost, and Vitor letting Vempers defend it with just the Goblins once, and then throwing the arrows behind another time. Vitor really played this one like a song he's sung 1,000 times. Vempers now playing from behind here and playing for the opportunity to not face Muhammad Light in round 1 next weekend.
And that's a hilarious. Our Tasty Bakers, 93-7 is a pretty good matchup, right? Yeah. So look, this is a best of 5. So this is where you start to see this not odd decision making, but you see that extra little leap in decision making come through. And I think Vempers just totally, and this is why a coach is so important, is he just had a massive blind spot he didn't realize. Is if you're going into game 1 with no big spell, you are really hoping and praying for your off meta deck to match up phenomenally. And it did exactly what is going to happen probably 9 times out of 10, which is match up horribly. We are in game 1, so you get that you're trying to save stuff, but you're also going up against one of the best in the world. And if you're playing something off meta, you got to go to Golem in that situation. If you're going to run a no spell deck other than NATO and E-Dragon, you just got to go and play what is actually working right now. And I would have loved to see Golem in game number 1 instead. Would it have worked? Maybe. Your opponent doesn't have a way to stop the Golem, doesn't have a way to slow it at all, it doesn't have a building or anything, and its single target DPS is really about the Prince, so that E-Dragon becomes even more impactful. I would have just loved to see something a little bit more on meta, but here we are, game number 2. Vitor only out a couple of cards that feel imperative in the current meta, and he gets a win for it.
And cycling a little bit faster this time around is Vitor, although not much. And Vempers just kind of sitting back here as he sets up that mortar to the left-hand lane. And this will be an interesting choice on his part as those spears go down easily, and then this Royal Giant completely takes care of this mortar.
Yeah, Skeleton Dragons up high here, and then maybe some recruits low. There they are to help get some DPS on this RG, and not a bad counter push coming in. We'll see how Vitor wants to deal with it.
It's a good miner to try to stick that Dark Prince in place, but doesn't quite get the extra splash damage from the Skeleton Dragons on tower. And Vitor going to have to choose to just eat the little bit of damage here from those Skelly Dragons, 27-30 on that left-hand lane. The lead crosswise from the bottom right to top left in favor of Vitor by 101 HP.
I was just going to say Vitor has a nice, a bit of a luxury right now being able to cycle his Fisherman in the back. It gives you just one more card that you can cycle without having to worry because he doesn't have a big target that he has to be worried about pulling in. And then the other part of that is that you can always then opt to Royal Giant or not to Royal Giant. So probably going to be his favorite cycle card here throughout.
And smart play by Vempers not to try to double down on that little bit of a counter push he had available. Just sets up, saves the elixir, gets his evolved recruits on the board.
Yeah, and I guess the last card might be Lightning. Not 100% sure, but if that's the case, this is where Vempers needs to recognize, I just need to populate the board, get souls to my Skeleton King, and get minor chip damage. The mortar is only for defense, and if he does decide to go RG Lightning on my mortar, then I should have already had enough map presence to where I can create enough pressure opposite lane to where Vitor cannot just do a full send. And that's exactly what we're seeing here again. So Vempers goes in the back, Vitor goes full send at the bridge. Should see a mortar come down here in the middle. There it is up high, avoiding that lightning. I like that play, and then surrounds the RG. And this is kind of a rinse and repeat situation. The only problem is he cannot be taking those shots if he's not also getting damage.
As we go into sudden death overtime, you know, it's Vitor trying to figure out the riddle here. It does feel like it's lightning in this situation. It makes more sense for Royal Giant overall, and then if it were poison, we would have seen some value plays out of it early on.
Venper still opting to go deep in the back with his recruits. And again, just map control, map control, map control. Stack the souls, get minor chip damage. Do not lose track of the goal at hand. And that's what we see so many players do when we get into triple elixirs. They stop doing what has been working. And this is working. Triple elixir, you know you're going to see more RGs out of Vitor, but not if you don't allow him to by just continuing to dominate the board. Now I want to see this push stop and then get those recruits in front of your Princess Tower this time.
That is a lot of damage, and then there you go. The high recruits will take care of 2 Fishermen and a Dark Prince. And now it's Venpers putting pressure on as we go into triple elixir.
And those skeleton dragons are just so annoying because you cannot use your lightning on them. You gotta save them for the mortar, and there you go. There was some good lightning value, but RG gets eaten alive, and that's exactly what has to happen.
And you're seeing, we talked about the little buff to those spear goblins, which just shoot a little bit faster than they used to. And between the goblin gang and the spears themselves, that Royal Giant just got eaten alive.
Yeah, I mean, there is just such a tough task at hand here for Vitor to clean up the spam and actually get back on offense before your opponent has just already controlled the board once again. And just perfect play here for Venpers in this matchup.
So here we go, going to be 1-1 after our first 2. Best of 5 for the easier path in our next week's event. So far, thin as a razor, the divide between these two.
Yeah, and it's just, it is, we've talked about this before in Royale Masters, the finals. That game number 2 is really difficult to win as the person that wins game number 1. It feels almost like a must-win situation for the other player in game number 2. You're the only one that has all the cards available. You've got to, you've got the ability to look back at what your opponent has played throughout the day and what you've been the most successful with. And that game number 2 feels like a big time necessity win. So now the tables get back to even here for Venpers and Vitor, and we go, all right, so now that Venpers has played that, what do I use as Vitor to kind of pick that deck apart? And this is where you and I and our ramblings, this is where it gets really fun, Rich.
Oh yeah, this is the big spot. So thinking about this between Vitor and Venpers, game number 1 for Vitor, we had the win with the Hog Rider Firecracker. Fireball arrows both still out. This last deck from Vitor wouldn't have favored a Mother Witch pick from Venpers in this last one. But maybe now Venpers makes the bet that Vitor doesn't go RG back-to-back, as people have not been running back the same deck, the same win condition very much today. So with Fireball arrows both out, now you can no longer arrow snowball. You can't do like a lot of the combo plays. Potentially something with Mother Witch in here would be a solid move, especially now with the, again, I've been saying this all day, some sort of Fireball bait. Your opponent has no Fireball, no Mega Knight, no Royal Ghost, no Firecracker. I think that Royal Hog's Fireball bait might be a solid move here.
Yeah, and then for Vitor on the other side of it, I would love to see him come back out with his deck. Maybe not in game number 3, but maybe in game number 4. I mean, I think that a lot of the struggles that he had in that previous game, and like you said, maybe, if Venpers does want to come out with a Mother Witch, there's not a lot of targets for that Mother Witch in that deck that Vitor just ran. He ran into some of the hardest stuff there in the mortar. It's a tanky tank, and then the spam. Mainly it's just the spam being everywhere. Already with the log, we're seeing Vitor changing things up just a little bit. Maybe he goes something back to more traditional, just like recruits, wall breaker spam or something. And with log and spears out early, that could definitely be the case.
Both players have NATO available, so Vitor might be running it, and Venper's looking like he's taking a page from Vitor's book. Not going with the both Fireball arrows combination, because Fireball is out, but a similar look overall.
Couple odd interactions there. Just the wall breaker still connects even with the Prince and Firecracker on the board, and then Vitor's minor to clean up that Firecracker gets just zapped away by that Prince. And now not a lot of elixir to deal, but using that bomb to even just body block that MK helped those spears out.
Yeah, curious to see if Vitor does go for the King Tower activation there at some point. You can combo that Mega Knight to a bomb tower, then to your spear goblins. But that one often comes at a sacrifice of defense in that lane that it came down initially. So we'll see if Vitor does go for that, if he finds the right moment for it, or if Venpers hedges by supporting those Mega Knights a little bit more aggressively.
Yeah, the dual lane game should be what Vitor is all about, being able to spread his opponent thin, because really this deck succeeds the most when you're able to get your MK and your Prince in the same lane. So Vitor just needs to make sure that he is always just going back and forth, baiting out a little bit of elixir here, making his opponent make negative trades with those wall breakers, and missing a King Tower activation isn't the best way to start that run.
That's a nice turnaround.
Wow.
We'll get a wall breaker connection plus some Skelly drags. So this is a huge, huge play for Vitor. Venpers had to anticipate that that was coming and just got caught high and low at the same time. Does Vitor have enough to defend here, though? This might be a massive hit the opposite direction.
Yeah, a lot spent there, and now Vitor is taking, an ocean of red on the left and still an ensuing push on the right. And that Firecracker has now gotten shots on both towers and will continue to get on that left-hand tower. No, wall breaker's just high enough, but no elixir in the tank to deal with that right-hand side. I love what Venpers is doing here pressure-wise on the left, and Vitor all of a sudden in what was a decent spot to start his offensive game just gets overrun.
Yeah, just sent a little bit too much on that right-hand lane. And, you know, while he got a lot of damage for it, then you have a healthy Prince, a healthy Mega Knight, a healthy everything coming the opposite direction. And that's I think that the biggest thing about playing against this Mega Knight Prince combination overall, and EQ in there as well, which is fascinating. Biggest thing about playing this Mega Knight Prince combination is you can never get caught thirsting for elixir. You can't get caught short-handed. And if you're going to make that move, you have to get that tower down. And even then, we saw that both towers were in so much trouble. So Vitor overextends in what was already going to be a difficult matchup anyway, and gets punished for it. And now Venpers will have the match point for the remainder of our competition.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a perfect storm created by Venpers. I mean, not to take anything away from him building a really, really nice offense. I mean, I don't know if he expected to take that much damage, but I think what he did realize is if he does take that much damage, he needs to really get something out of it. And just Royal Ghost by itself at the bridge is still one of the best pressure plays in the game. It just makes Vitor not be in sequence defensively. And then you add in the fact that you're baiting out some attention and elixir on the left-hand side. You get the Evoed Firecracker down on the right-hand side. It's just the perfect storm. Everything kind of comes together perfectly there. The MK gets distracted in the middle by the Knight, but the Knight then gives splash damage to the other tower and the Spear Goblins that Vitor played, again, all the way back to that Evoed Firecracker. So, you know, I'm sure Vitor would have loved a little bit of that elixir back so he could have used that poison defensively, but instead, beautiful recognition by Venpers.
2 in a row now for Venpers, who has has Recruits and Firecracker both out. Arrows, Fireball both out as well. It's interesting. With Hog and Miner both gone, less of a reason for Vitor to consider running a NATO. Right, so now this becomes the question. You expect Vitor to not run a NATO because its two best cards that it counters are no longer available for you. Where do you draw? Is there something else that you might play because the NATO is out that maybe is like a third-tier option here?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've said it over and over again, but I just really keep feeling like there's a spot for Vitor to play Goblin Giant Sparky or Goblin Giant Beatdown with Mother Witch. Fireball is out, Recruits are out. There's just a good way to overwhelm the board now that you don't have to worry about the Recruits. And then with the Sparky's biggest problem these days has been that Recruits, because you're able to play a building down low and then surround that Sparky with your Evoed Recruits and create good dual lane pressure, which is, again, something you don't really want to deal with when you're playing Goblin Giant Sparky. So I would love to see Vitor go to that or go back to the Royal Giant deck that we saw earlier. I want to see him slow things down just a little bit, because these last couple games have not gone well for him. He has so much information at hand. You know, there's no Evoed Firecracker, there's no Evoed Recruits. He doesn't have the Mortar, he doesn't have the Prince or the MK. These are all great damage dealers. The Fireball being out, I think this is just a moment where you just go a little bit heavier and you try to abuse the fact that your opponent is starting to get painted into a corner. Use what's on meta, use what's super strong right now.
You know, this is interesting looking at sort of Vitor's deck pool here. Mother Witch still available for him, and Venpers did just play. You know, it's interesting. I don't know if Mother Witch is a great call here with Spears, Gang, Bats all out for Venpers. So Vitor probably not going to go in that direction. Of course, you mentioned Fireball and Arrows both being out, potentially opening up some of those routes. This is again where your analyst makes their money in all these ones. You know, Vitor has been favoring Minor Wallbreakers Mother Witch with recruits lately. We saw him just play Minor Wallbreakers here, but the deck that you talked about, and here he goes, Minor Wallbreakers. Maybe he's going to run Mother Witch with the Fireball out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think he should in this case, because then he's trying to reach a little too far, and he's going to play something that is just completely out of meta. But, you know, here we go. We'll see what he wants. I mean, he wants to go back to this deck. It's tried and true. It's one of his favorites. And Skelly Drag's at least a nice turn in terms of that Fireball being out. So now those Skelly Drags can get just a little bit more value. And that's just giving Elixir to your opponent there.
Yeah, the Skeleton Dragons, just the issue with the deck that he played last game, he had Skeleton Dragons, but he didn't have an alternative position for the Fireball, right? They were the only real important target for it. And it looks like he might just be running back the exact same deck here this time around, as he's running the Spears here. That doesn't usually go with the Mother Witch deck, so going, hey, that last matchup was rough for me, I think I can do better this time.
And I don't know. I don't know if that's actually the case. You're running into two buildings, Log, NATO, Ice Spirit.
And not having a tremendous counter to the drill here, right? No. He's gonna give up some damage like this.
It always just becomes a bit of an overspend conversation then with the drill if you want to mitigate 100% of the damage.
The Barbs are an interesting call here in this deck for Venpers. Right, they do.
Yeah, I mean,
clog up
usually
the lane
you'd see a Knight with this combination instead, but the Barbs maybe thinking he could create some dual lane opportunities. You obviously weren't worried about the Hog. Maybe he was a little bit worried about a Royal Giant. You know, you do have a lot of great ways to stop RG. Maybe that was something Venpers was a bit focused on.
Yeah, Fireball out does make the Barbarians stronger, and not having another good single target, not having a good thing to chunk down that Royal Giant in this deck. And of course, they would not be too susceptible to lightning. So far, it's all Vitor, though.
Yeah, Vitor doing a great job here, and for as much control as this deck has at the top of your screen, the problem is that you've only got 2 troop cards, Rich, and they both cost 5 elixir. So your cycle is always going to be a little bit funky.
I didn't even think about that. That is actually wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of ground that those 2 cards have to cover and basically always be available to be back in cycle. But then you look right here, Xe and Barbs played there, and you get all this poison value, and that is, whew, I mean, if you're a Vitor fan, that's great for you.
Well, this is why the analysts get paid.
Yeah.
Competitive, right? Why you get a percentage of some of these players.
And
is
that
trying
is just
to
the
make
easiest poison ever. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that was not a difficult choice to make. But again, as you mentioned, what options does Venpers have? Has not been able to activate King Tower here, which you'd like to do, and he's just calling good game, knows we're going to game number 5.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually, wow, that Executioner does line up on that right-hand side, and obviously going to be a little, not enough, a little too late. And yes, going into game number 5, this will be a very, very fun one. I mean, that was an incredibly dominant game win by Vitor, I believe, in both of his wins, right? Whereas the ones that we saw Venpers come out with, it was just a little bit more work being put in. And that makes sense when you look at, Vitor and how experienced he is, just making that tough on his opponent. But that was a very easy win for Vitor, going right back to the well.
It's going to be interesting for Vitor trying to figure out what he wants to do in this next game, because with that win, he now has no fireball, no poison, no no log, and no arrows, right? So for Vitor, it kind of feels like a drill NATO deck might be the call for him. He's sort of three different directions, right? He goes with something EQ based, right? So either an RG EQ or potentially, I don't think he can go Hog. No, he won with Hog in the first game. So an EQ-based deck maybe for RG, a Lightning-based deck, so maybe some sort of beatdown, or he goes with Drill NATO. Those seem like the three options, and so that kind of is it's a pretty narrow path that Venpers has to pick against.
Yeah, and I am very curious to see where Vitor goes with this, because obviously we saw that he was liking that RG deck earlier, but he still hasn't played the Evoed Recruits. And, getting through a best-of-5 set without playing Evoed Recruits seems like a bit of a miscalculation. And I'm sure that's what, and we have seen Evoed Recruits with RG. I mean, that is something that could also happen here. But I think no matter what it is, I really do want to see that Evoed RG, or excuse me, those Evoed Recruits out of Vitor. He used the Evo Knight, so fine. You don't need to go back to, Evo Knight, Goblin Giant. That conversation doesn't really need to be there. You don't need to worry about the spam deck, right? We just saw him win with that. But what you should be coming out with and what you should be thinking about is those recruits if you're Venpers.
This is interesting, right? Because Drill now, looking at what Vitor has, doesn't have Royal Ghost, doesn't have the Evo Knight. Both of those kind of nerf Drill NATO a little bit, but not tremendously.
Doesn't have fireball, arrows, or bomb tower, Rich. You have talked about the Hogs a couple times. It's not a bad call either.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't. That's a lot out, and this is why this game 5 is so much fun, right? You get so tight here. I mean, if you're Venpers, you're kind of making a pick. Am I facing NATO? Am I facing Lightning? Or am I facing EQ? Right? That's kind of what you're trying to think about, and then work backwards from there. You could be up against, I don't think that if you're Venpers, you run Golem here, only because EQ and Lightning are both, one of those two is very likely. If you pick that, you're betting on Drill NATO. You're betting on a no big spell deck, which I don't think is a really safe bet in this context.
Yeah, I agree. I think avoiding Elixir Pump, avoiding Golem at all costs is a pretty good idea here. The other thing with Golem late in a set is that if you make any mistake early on, it's really, really tough to come back from it. It's pretty unforgiving unless you can recognize, all right, I need to be in a tower trade situation. But I think as we've seen earlier today, it might have even been from Venpers, maybe not, that was not there. The wherewithal of when to take that damage. I don't think it was him, but here we go. Game number 5. As you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, those are the 16 unavailable cards for each respective player. They can build a deck around that. And yeah, I wouldn't want to be in game 5 against Vitor either, Venpers.
A little frustrated there. And a slow start here, which could mean one of these two players is going heavy.
I mean, Vitor has all the pieces to play Golem. And he doesn't have to worry as much about big spells. I mean, he obviously has to worry about poison, but EQ is the worst thing that you want to run into when running something with Elixir Pump. But also, him going right back to RG with swapping in those recruits could be an option.
Venpers really does not run Lightning, though, too. So EQ out and unlikely to run Lightning. I don't hate it.
And even though Vitor has had the opportunity to play Goblin Giant Beatdown or Goblin Giant Sparky, he hasn't really taken that opportunity today. So I can't imagine that he's going to do it now in the finals with everything on the line.
Both guys have Firecracker out, which does nerf Drill pretty heavily. Could Vitor
this is
run...
fascinating.
Could Vitor run... Either one of these guys run Ram Rider recruits, but with Lightning. Or poison.
Yeah, I was looking down at Vitor's play decks, and he has come out with Ram Rider a couple times. For some reason, I don't love it. I don't really even have a good reason why. I mean, the Ram Rider decks usually run arrows and a fireball. And, neither of these guys have either of those cards available. So that could be a part of that equation. But I mean, Vitor might just be going RG again. And a Goblin Cage to start things off.
Yeah, just banking some elixir here, and there you go, Golem. So, like we said, EQ out, Fireball out, Miner out.
Yeah.
Pump certainly could be more powerful, has NATO available. And Venpers playing nothing here. What is Venpers doing?
Venpers must have lagged out. Or his, yeah, I mean, there's...
Or is he playing at school and was emoting because now he has to go back to pay attention?
Wow.
Or maybe he repeated a card here in the deck that he chose?
Maybe, yeah, that has to be what the angry face was, because that is just a very anticlimactic finish to a very great day. I mean, the silver lining here is that Venpers is still going to be back next weekend for our 2-day playoffs. But that is just a rough way to lose $200, and I'm very excited to refresh and look at the fact that there you go, arrows played again by Venpers. He had Hog arrows in that deck, and arrows already out, I believe, for Venpers, and that is just a tough way to go. He actually ran back the exact same deck that he won with earlier, Rich.
Oh boy. That is a pretty bad call there to just completely repeat a deck that you already won with.
Yeah. Yep. And that, again, I mean, it still goes to your point of that's why your analyst is really making their big bucks in these final games, because if you have an analyst and they sent you that deck that you copied and pasted, you might need to be looking to have a conversation with your analyst.
Ooh boy, that was a tough one. Not the way you want to end your day. Obviously not in the most consequential of matchups, because he is already through to our $10,000 playoff weekend that is going to be here next weekend. But he now will also have to face Mohamed Light in the first round, and we will look at that bracket here in just a couple of moments. But let's take a look at the bracket for today, our final bracket, and the way that everything shook out here. I think we'll have that ready in just a moment. There we go. And the path for Vitor, kicking things off with a win over Saturo and then a 2-0 on a boss. A very tough back and forth with Tourist, and then goes all the way to Game 5 against Venpers for the championship.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy that probably plays over 100 games of Clash Royale a day, that is the easiest $200 that Vitor has picked up along his path, and a very well-deserved 200. But I gotta say, I would have really loved to see a true best of 5 between them in that 5th game. But hey, that's the name of the game. That's duel mode, whether you're at World Finals, we've seen that before, or here in our Wild Card Open. Venpers making a small mental mistake, but again, still in the running for that $10,000 weekend.
And speaking of that $10,000 weekend, let's take a look at the seeding for next weekend as our number 1 seed based on those points. Look at that. Mohamed Light, followed by Clown, a.k.a. Kickash, got very close to World Finals, did in Thrill as well here in our 3rd place spot. Ta, round out the top 4. Akaza, who you might know is the Expo player Nexus in our number 5 spot. Another world champion plus world finalist this year in Ruben. And then our final 2 qualifiers today, Vitor and Venpers. And Andrew, let's look at the prize pool they're playing for next weekend.
Yeah, a lot of money up on the line. I mean, $30,000 for this entire run, but just next weekend, we got that 10K finals. And, you know, that is one of those things where, okay, today maybe didn't go the way you wanted it to, but next weekend is really what it's all about. It was just a $200 matchup, whereas you see 1st and 2nd place next weekend, that's a $2,500 matchup. And of course, $5,000 goes to 1st place, which is always exciting to think about playing for that much money. This is the bracket, and based off the seeds, pretty easy to figure it out. 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, and so on and so forth. Mo Light and Venpers to start things off. Ta and Akaza, Clown and Vitor in Thrill, and Ruben. And remember, guys, this is now double elimination, and of course, every single elimination game will be a best of 5. So let's hope that Venpers cleans up that 5th game, if you will.
That's right. Yeah, all the upper bracket matches, except for the end, are going to be those best of threes. When you're facing elimination, yeah, best of 5. So it's going to be a big weekend, folks. 2 days of competition right here on the channel. So if you didn't yet, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitch. Make sure you come back, put on notifications. It's a 2-day event for, of course, that big-time prize pool. And we get to see people really dig deep in these BO5s. Andrew,
yeah,
this was a really, really fun day. Thoughts on as we wrap things up on today and what we're looking forward to next weekend?
You know, honestly, I was pretty impressed with what we saw today. There were some ups and downs from all the players. I think some of the deck picking early on, you really can see how hard they're thinking about that game 3 or game 5 in finals. And I think the biggest thing that I saw was just in that game number 1, since we're going to see a lot of best of 5s, you've got to put yourself in a winning position. I don't think you ever look at game number 1 in a BO5 as a punt to gain information on your opponent, just because the level of competitor you're going to run into next weekend. I think every game is a must win. I know that feels like a little bit of like a duh statement, but trust me, I feel like that game number 1, we've seen a lot of people drop their guard just a bit to save spells and garner information, and I just don't know if that's the way to go.
Well, we will find out what the best way to go is next weekend. Same time, same place, both Saturday and Sunday. Can't wait to see you there. On behalf of everyone here, my partner, Andrew Guy, Tasty in the booth, and everyone who made Royale Masters possible, I'm Rich Slayton. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks for watching.